And now, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. We're going straight to what we know what you want. We know that you don't want to hear us talk right now, so we're going straight to listening live to the debate with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And in between breaks, we will come back and join you with commentary. The audio is patched straight in, so you can hear nice and surround sound. So I'm shutting up. We'll be watching our chat room. Join us in the chat room on YouTube, and you can join the conversation that way. In the meantime, here we go.
This campaign is also determined to end a rigged economy where the rich get richer and everybody else get poorer, and create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Thank you.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here in New York, and I am delighted to have this chance to discuss the issues that are important to our future. I was so honored to serve as a senator from New York for 8 years, and to work to provide opportunity for all of our citizens to make it possible that we could knock down the barriers that stand in the way of people getting ahead and staying ahead. And during those 8 years, we faced some difficult challenges together. We faced 9/11. We worked hard to rebuild New York. I was particularly concerned about our first responders and others who'd been affected in their health by what they had experienced. We worked hard to bring jobs from Buffalo to Albany and all parts of New York to give more hardworking people a chance to really make the most out of their own talents. And we worked hard to really keep New York values at the center of who we are and what we do together. And that is exactly what I want to do as your president. We will celebrate our diversity. We will work together, bringing us back to being united, setting some big, bold, progressive goals for America. That's what I'm offering in this campaign, to build on the work, to build on the values that we share here in New York, to take those to Washington, and to knock down those barriers that in any way hold back not only individuals, Americans, but our country from reaching our full potential. That is what my campaign is about.
Thank you, Secretary. We are going to deal with many of the issues both of you just raised. I want to begin with a question that goes right to the heart of which one of you should be the Democratic presidential nominee. Senator Sanders, in the last week, you've raised questions about Secretary Clinton's qualifications to be president. You said that something is clearly lacking in terms of her judgment, and you accused her of having a credibility gap. So let me ask you, do you believe that Secretary Clinton has the judgment to be president?
Well, I've known Secretary Clinton, how long? 25 years. We worked together in the Senate, and I said that in response to the kind of attacks we were getting from the Clinton campaign. Washington Post headline says, Clinton campaign says Sanders is unqualified, and that's what the surrogates were saying. Does Secretary Clinton have the experience and the intelligence to be a president? Of course she does. But I do question her judgment. I question a judgment which voted for the war in Iraq, the worst foreign policy blunder in the history of this country, voted for virtually every disastrous trade agreement, which cost us millions of decent paying jobs, and I question her judgment about running super PACs which are collecting tens of millions of dollars from special interests, including $15 million from Wall Street. I don't believe that that is the kind of judgment we need to be the kind of president we need.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, it is true that now that the spotlight is pretty bright here in New York, some things have been said, and Senator Sanders did call me unqualified. I've been called a lot of things in my life. That was a first. And then he did say that he had to question my judgment. Well, the people of New York voted for me twice to be their senator from New York. And President Obama trusted my judgment enough to ask me to be Secretary of State for the United States. So, look, we have disagreements on policy. There's no doubt about it. But if you go and read, which I hope all of you will before Tuesday, Senator Sanders' long interview with the New York Daily News, talk about judgment and talk about the kinds of problems he had answering questions about even his core issue, breaking up the banks. When asked, he could not explain how that would be done. And when asked about a number of foreign policy issues, he could not answer about Afghanistan, about Israel, about counterterrorism, except to say if he'd had some paper in front of him, maybe he could. I think you need to have the judgment on day one to be both president and commander-in-chief.
Senator.
And let's talk about judgment. And let us talk about the worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. I led the opposition to that war. Secretary Clinton voted for that war. Let's talk about judgment. Let's talk about super PACs and 501c4s, money which is completely undisclosed. Where does the money come from? Do we really feel confident about a candidate saying that she's going to bring change in America when she is so dependent on big money interests? I don't think so.
Well, let me just say.
Secretary, let him finish.
Okay.
Thirdly, we have got to understand that in America we should be thinking big, not small.
Thank you.
We need to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a right. My view, not her view.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary.
Well, make no mistake about it. This is not just an attack on me, it's an attack on President Obama. President Obama, you know, let me tell you why. You may not like the answer, but I'll tell you why. President Obama had a super PAC when he ran. President Obama took tens of millions of dollars from contributors. And President Obama was not at all influenced when he made the decision to pass and sign Dodd-Frank, the toughest regulations on Wall Street in many a year. So this is a phony attack that is designed to raise questions when there is no evidence or support to undergird the insinuations that he is putting forward in these attacks.
Thank you, Secretary. We're going to continue on this, but I want Dana Bash to continue with the questioning.
Secretary Clinton, the government announced yesterday that 5 of the biggest banks on Wall Street have failed to develop plans to dismantle themselves in the event of another financial crisis. This is the second time in 2 years those banks neglected to come up with credible plans. So as president, would you call on regulators to start the process of breaking up these banks, something that the law not only allows but actually explicitly encourages?
Absolutely. You know, this is what I've been saying for the past year. No bank is too big to fail. No executive too powerful to jail. I have been talking about what we should be doing under Dodd-Frank. I'm glad that Senator Sanders is now joining in talking about Dodd-Frank, because Dodd-Frank sets forth the approach that needs to be taken. I believe, and I will appoint regulators who are tough enough and ready enough to break up any bank that fails the tests under Dodd-Frank. There are 2 sections there, and if they fail either one, that they're a systemic risk, a grave risk to our economy, or if they fail the other, that their living wills, which is what you're referring to, are inadequate. But let's look at what's at stake here. We can never let Wall Street wreck Main Street again. I spoke out against Wall Street when I was a senator from New York. I have been standing up and saying continuously. We have the law. We've got to execute under it. So you're right. I will move immediately to break up any financial institution, but I go further because I want the law to extend to those that are part of the shadow banking industry, the big insurance companies, the hedge funds, something that I have been arguing for now for a long time.
Senator Sanders, you were recently asked what you would replace the big Wall Street banks with if you could break them up. You said, quote, that's their decision. Why would you trust the banks to restructure themselves?
All right, first thought, Donna.
When you say their whole business model is fraudulent.
That's right. So let's start off with the basic premise. A few days ago, Goldman Sachs formally reached a settlement with the United States government for $5 billion. What Goldman Sachs acknowledged was essentially that they were selling fraudulent packages of subprime mortgage loans. Goldman Sachs was not the only bank. Other banks, of course, did the same. Now, I don't need Dodd-Frank now to tell me that we have got to break up these banks, A, because they're based on fraudulent principles, and B, because when you have 6 financial institutions that have assets equivalent to 58% of the GDP of this country, they are just too big, too much concentration of wealth and power.
But Senator,
point is, we have got to break them up so that they do not pose a systemic risk and so that we have a vibrant economy with a competitive financial system.
But Senator, you didn't answer the specific question, which is not just about breaking up the banks, but why allow the banks to do it themselves?
Because I'm not sure that what the government should say is you are too big to fail. You've got to be a certain size. And then the banks themselves can figure out what they want to sell off. I don't know that it's appropriate for the Department of Treasury to be making those decisions. What we need is to make sure that they are safe.
Dana, you know, I love being in Brooklyn. This is great. Dana, let me add here that there are 2 ways to go at this under Dodd-Frank, which is, after all, the law that we passed under President Obama. And I'm proud that Barney Frank, one of the authors, has endorsed me, because what I have said continuously is, yes, sometimes the government may have to order certain actions. Sometimes the government can permit the institution themselves to take those actions. That has to be the judgment of the regulators. But there's another element to this. I believe strongly that executives of any of these organizations should be financially penalized. If there is a settlement, they should have to pay up through compensation or bonuses, because we have to go after not just the big giant institution. We've got to go after the people who are making the decisions in the institution and hold them accountable as well.
Senator Sanders, you've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton. You've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton for accepting money from Wall Street. Can you name one decision that she made as senator that shows that she favored banks because of the money she received?
Sure. The obvious decision is when the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street brought this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession, the Great Depression of the 30s, when millions of people lost their jobs and their homes and their life savings. The obvious response to that is that you got a bunch of fraudulent operators and that they have got to be broken up. That was my view way back, and I introduced legislation to do that. Now, Secretary Clinton was busy giving speeches to Goldman Sachs for $225,000 a speech. So the proper response, in my view, is we should break them up, and that's what my legislation does.
Well, as you can tell, Dana, he cannot come up with any example because there is no example. It is important it is important. It's always important. It may be inconvenient, but it's always important to get the facts straight. I stood up against the behaviors of the banks when I was a senator. I called them out on their mortgage behavior. I also was very willing to speak out against some of the special privileges they had under the tax code. When I went to the Secretary of State office, the President Obama, led the effort to pass the Dodd-Frank bill. That is the law. Now, this is our 9th debate. In the prior 8 debates, I have said, we have a law. You don't just say, we're upset about this, I'm upset about it. You don't just say, go break them up. You have a law because we are a nation of laws.
Thank you,
So
Madam
I
Secretary.
support Dodd-Frank, but I have consistently said that's not enough. We've got to include the shadow banking sector.
Sanders.
Secretary Clinton called them out. Oh my goodness. They must have been really crushed by this. And was that before or after you received huge sums of money by giving speaking engagements behind them? So they must have been very, very upset by what you did. Look, here is the difference. And here is the clear difference. These banks, in my view, have too much power. They have shown themselves to be fraudulent organizations endangering the well-being of our economy. If elected president, I will break them up. We've got legislation to do that. End of discussion.
Secretary Clinton, if I may, Senator Sanders keeps bringing up the speeches that you gave to Goldman Sachs. So I'd like to ask you, you've said that you don't want to release the transcripts until everybody does it, but if there is nothing in those speeches that you think would change voters' minds, why not just release the transcripts and put this whole issue to bed? You know,
First of all, there isn't an issue. When I was in public service, serving as the senator from New York, I did stand up to the banks. I did make it clear that their behavior would not be excused. I'm the only one on this stage who did not vote to deregulate swaps and derivatives as Senator Sanders did, which led to a lot of the problems that we had with Lehman Brothers. Now, if you're going to look at the problems that actually caused the Great Recession, you got to look at the whole picture. It was a giant insurance company, AIG. It was an investment bank, Lehman Brothers. It was mortgage companies like Countrywide. I'm not saying that Senator Sanders did something untoward when he voted to deregulate swaps and derivatives, but the fact is he did. And that contributed to the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which started the cascade.
Senator Sanders, 1 second, please. Secretary Clinton, the question was about the transcripts of the speeches to Goldman Sachs.
Yes.
Why not release them?
I have said, look, there are certain expectations when you run for president. This is a new one, and I've said if everybody agrees to do it, because there are speeches for money on the other side, I know that, but I will tell you this, there is a long-standing expectation that everybody running release their tax returns, and you can go to my website and see 8 years of tax returns, and I've released 30 years of tax returns, and I think every candidate, including Senator Sanders and Donald Trump, should do the same.
Secretary Clinton, we're going to get to the tax returns later, but just to put a button on this, you're running now for the Democratic nomination.
Right.
And it is your Democratic opponent and many Democratic voters who want to see those transcripts. It's not about the Republicans.
Let's set the same standard for everybody. When everybody does it, okay, I will do it. But let's set and expect the same standard on tax returns. Everybody does it, and then we move forward.
Thank you.
Well, let me respond. Secretary Clinton, you just heard her. Everybody else does it, she'll do it. I will do it. I am going to release all of the transcripts of the speeches that I gave on Wall Street behind closed doors. Not for 225,000, not for 2,000, not for 2 cents. There were no speeches. And second of all, of course, we will release our taxes. Jane does our taxes. We've been a little bit busy lately. You'll excuse us. But we will,
Senator,
we will get them out.
That was
Senator,
nice.
you know, there
That
are
was pretty
still a lot
good.
of copy-
Senator, when are you
copy
going to
machines around.
you've been asked for weeks and weeks to release your
Well, I
tax
think we
return?
got one that's coming out tomorrow.
Which one?
Last year's.
2014.
Yes.
What about
You'll get
2013?
'em.
All the
Yes,
other ones.
yeah, look, I don't want to get anybody very excited. They are very boring tax returns. No big money from speeches, no major investments.
Bernie Sanders is giving them hell.
Unfortunately, I remain one of the poorer members of the United States Senate, and that's what that will show.
So, Senator, just to be clear, tomorrow you will release the 2014 tax returns from you and your family.
Yes.
And what about the earlier ones? What's
Yes.
the problem? What's taking so
not-
long? Because you just have to go to the filing cabinet, make a copy, and release them.
Well, the answer is, you know, what we have always done in my family is Jane does them. And she's been out on the campaign trail. We will get them out. We'll get them out very shortly. It's not a
Thank
big
you.
deal.
Senator, you've slammed companies like General Electric
Yes.
and Verizon for moving jobs outside of the United States. Yesterday, the CEO of Verizon called your views contemptible and said in your home state of Vermont, Verizon has invested more than $16 million and pays millions of dollars a year to local businesses. He says you are, quote, uninformed on this issue and disconnected from reality. Given your obvious contempt for large American corporations, how would you, as President of the United States, be able to effectively promote American businesses around the world?
Well, for a start, I would tell the gentleman who's the CEO at Verizon to start negotiating with the communication workers of America. And this is a perfect example, Wolf, of the kind of corporate greed which is destroying the middle class of this country. This gentleman makes $18 million a year in salary. That's his compensation. This gentleman is now negotiating to take away health care benefits of Verizon workers, outsource call center jobs to the Philippines, and trying to create a situation where workers will lose their jobs. He is not investing in the way he should in inner cities in America.
Senator, but the question was, given your contempt for large American corporations, as president, how would you be able to promote American business around the world?
First of all, the word contempt is not right. There's some great businesses who treat their workers and the environment with respect. Verizon happens not to be one of them. And what we need to do is to tell this guy, Immelt, who's the head of General Electric, doesn't like me, well, that's fine. He has outsourced hundreds of thousands of decent paying jobs throughout the world, cut his workforce here substantially, and in a given year, by the way, turns out that both Verizon and General Electric in a given year pay nothing in federal income tax despite making billions in profit.
Senator, experts say that no matter the means to bring back these jobs to the United States, prices of goods for consumers in the United States would go up, which would disproportionately impact the poor and middle class. So how would you bring back these jobs to the United States without affecting the cost of goods to America's middle class and poor?
Well, for a start, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And number two, while it is true, we may end up paying a few cents more for a hamburger at McDonald's, at the end of the day, what this economy desperately needs is to rebuild our manufacturing sector with good-paying jobs. We cannot continue to sustain the loss of millions of decent-paying jobs that we have seen over the last 20, 30 years based on trade agreements, of which Secretary Clinton has voted for almost every one of those. That has got to change.
Thank you, Secretary Clinton.
Well, first of all, I do have a very comprehensive plan to create more jobs, and I think that has to be at the center of our economic approach. And so I think it is important that we do more on manufacturing. I went to Syracuse and laid out a $10 billion plan that would, I believe, really jumpstart advanced manufacturing. I have seen the results of what can happen when we have the government cooperating with business. And that's exactly what I will do. When I was Secretary of State, I helped to lead the way to increase exports of American goods around the world, which supports tens of thousands of jobs. So I think you've got to go at this with a sense of how to accomplish the goal we are setting. More good jobs with rising incomes for people everywhere from inner cities to rural areas to every distressed community in America. And that's exactly what my plan would bring about. I think we have a pretty good record. If we look at what happened in the 1990s, we got 23 million new jobs and incomes went up for everybody. Let's do that again in
Senator,
America.
I'm going to have you respond in a moment. Stand by. Secretary, you will respond in a moment, but I have to follow up with Secretary Clinton. You stood on the stage with Governor Cuomo in support of new legislation to raise New York's minimum wage to $15 an hour. But you do not support raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. As president, if a Democratic Congress put a $15 minimum wage bill on your desk, would you sign it?
Well, of course I would. And I have supported the fight for 15. I am proud to have the endorsement of most of the unions that have led the fight for 15. I was proud to stand on the stage with Governor Cuomo, with SEIU and others who have been leading this battle. And I will work as hard as I can to raise the minimum wage. I always have. I supported that when I was in the Senate. But what I have also said is that we've got to be smart about it, just the way Governor Cuomo was here in New York. If you look at it, we moved more quickly to 15 in New York City, more deliberately toward 12, 1250 upstate, then to 15. That is exactly my position. It's a model for the nation, and that's what I will do as president. Go as quickly as possible to get to 15.
I am sure a lot of people are very surprised to learn that you supported raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
No, wait a minute.
That's just not
Come
accurate.
on. I have stood on the debate stage with Senator Sanders 8 prior times.
Excuse me.
I have said the exact same
Senator,
thing.
please.
If we can raise it to 15 in New York or Los Angeles
Secretary,
or Seattle, let's do it.
If you're both screaming at each other, the viewers won't be able to hear either of you. So please don't talk over each other. Go ahead.
All right. When this campaign began, I said that we got to end the starvation minimum wage of 7.25, raise it to 15. Secretary Clinton said, let's raise it to 12. There's a difference. And by the way, what has happened is history has outpaced Secretary Clinton. Because all over this country, people are standing up and they're saying 12 is not good enough. We need $15 an hour.
Okay.
Go ahead, Secretary.
And to suddenly
Thank you
suddenly announce now that you're for 15, I don't think it's quite accurate.
All right, Secretary.
All right. I have said from the very beginning that I supported the fight for 15. I supported those on the front lines of the fight for. It happens to be true. I supported the 15 effort in LA. I supported it in Seattle. I supported it for the fast food workers in New York. The minimum wage at the national level right now is $7.25, right? We want to raise it higher than it ever has been. But we also have to recognize some states and some cities will go higher, and I support that. I have taken my cue from the Democrats in the Senate, led by Senator Patty Murray and others, like my good friend Kirsten Gillibrand, who has said, we will set a national level of 12 and then urge any place that can go above it to go above it. Going from 725 to 12 is a huge difference. 35 million people will get a raise. 1 in 4 working mothers will get a raise. I want to get something done, and I think setting the goal to get to 12 is the way to go, encouraging others to get to 15. But of course, if we have a Democratic Congress, we will go to 15.
Senator, go ahead.
Well, I think the secretary has confused a lot of people. I don't know how you're there for the fight for 15 when you say you want a $12 an hour national minimum wage. Now, in fact, there is an effort. Patty Murray has introduced legislation for $12 minimum wage. That's good. I introduced legislation for $15 an hour minimum wage, which is better. And ultimately, what we have got to determine is, after massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 0.1%, when millions of our people are working longer hours for low wages,
Senator.
I think we have got to be clear, not equivocate. $15 and minimum wage in 50 states in this country as soon as possible.
We're going to turn to another critically important issue right now, guns in America. Secretary Clinton, you've said that Vermont, Senator Sanders' home state, has, quote, the highest per capita number of guns that end up committing crimes in New York. But only 1.2% of the guns recovered in New York in 2014 were from Vermont. Are you seriously blaming Vermont and implicitly Senator Sanders for New York's gun violence?
No, of course not. Of course not. This is a serious difference between us. And what I want to start by saying, it's not a laughing matter. 90 people on average a day are killed or commit suicide or die in accidents from guns. 33,000 people a year. I take it really seriously because I have spent more time than I care to remember being with people who have lost their loved ones. So yes, we have a problem in America. We need a president who will stand up against the gun lobby. We need a president who will fight for common sense gun safety reforms. And what we have here is a big difference. Senator Sanders voted against the Brady bill 5 times. He voted for the most important NRA priority, namely giving immunity from liability to gun makers and dealers, something that is at the root of a lot of the problems that we are facing. Then he doubled down on that in the New York Daily News interview and asked whether he would support the Sandy Hook parents suing to try to do something to rein in the advertising of the AR-15, which is advertised to young people as being a combat weapon, killing on the battlefield. He said they didn't deserve their day in court. I could not disagree more. And finally, this is the only industry in America, the only one that has this kind of special protection. We hear a lot from Senator Sanders about the greed and recklessness of Wall Street. And I agree. We've got to hold Wall Street accountable.
Thank you.
Well, what about the greed and recklessness of the gun manufacturers and dealers in America?
Good. Well, the only problem is, Wolf, she didn't answer your question. You asked her whether she thought that Vermont was responsible for a lot of the gun violence, and you made the point that what she said was totally absurd.
I asked her, are you seriously blaming Vermont and implicitly Senator Sanders for New York's gun violence? She said no, but go ahead.
So why did she put out that statement?
I put it out.
A statement because, excuse me, I think I'm responding now.
Please, go ahead.
A statement that was refuted by the governor of the state of Vermont, who was a supporter of hers, who said, oh yeah, in campaigns, people tend to exaggerate. Here is the fact on guns. Let's talk about guns. That horrible, horrible Sandy Hook, what's the word that we want to use? Murder, assault, slaughter, unspeakable act. Back in 1988, I ran for the United States Congress, 1 seat in the state of Vermont. I probably lost that election, which I lost by 3 points, because I was the only candidate running who said, you know what, we should ban assault weapons, not see them sold or distributed in the United States of America. I've got a D- voting record from the NRA. And in fact, because I come from a state which has virtually no gun control, I believe that I am the best qualified candidate to bring together that consensus that is desperately needed in this country.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Secretary Clinton, I want you to respond to that, but why did you put out that statement blaming Vermont and its gun policy for some of the deaths by guns in New York?
Well, the facts are that most of the guns that end up committing crimes in New York come from out of state. They come from the states that don't have the kind of serious efforts to control guns that we do in New York. But let me say this. In 1988, as we've heard on every debate occasion, Senator Sanders did run for the Congress, and he lost. He came back in 1990, and he won. And during that campaign, he made a commitment to the NRA that he would be against waiting periods. And in fact, in his own book, he talks about his 1990 campaign. And here's what he said. He clearly was helped by the NRA because they ran ads against his opponent. So then he went to the Congress, where he has been a largely very reliable supporter of the NRA, voting. He kept his word to the NRA. He voted against the Brady bill 5 times because it had waiting periods in it. Thankfully, enough people finally voted for it to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them.
Coming to you now. Senator, I want you to respond, but I also want you to respond to this. You recently said you do not think crime victims should be able to sue gun makers for damages. The daughter of the Sandy Hook Elementary School principal who was killed back in the 2012 mass shooting says you owe her and the other victims' families an apology. Do you?
What we need to do is to do everything that we can to make certain that guns do not fall into the hands of people who do not have them. Now, I voted against this gun liability law because I was concerned that in rural areas all over this country, if a gun shop owner sells a weapon legally to somebody and that person then goes out and kills somebody, I don't believe it is appropriate that that gun shop owner who just sold a legal weapon to be held accountable and be sued. But what I do believe is when gun shop owners and others knowingly are selling weapons to people who should not have them. Somebody walks in, they want thousands of rounds of ammunition, or they want a whole lot of guns. Yes, that gun shop owner or that gun manufacturer should be held liable.
So, Senator, do you owe the Sandy Hook families an apology?
No, I don't think I owe them an apology. They are in court today, and actually they won a preliminary decision today. They have the right to sue, and I support them and anyone else who wants the right to sue.
Well, I believe that the law that Senator Sanders voted for, that I voted against, giving this special protection to gun manufacturers and to dealers, is an absolute abdication of responsibility on the part of those who voted for it. This is a unique gift given to only one industry in the world, as by the United States Congress. As Senator Murphy from Connecticut said, we have tougher standards holding toy gun manufacturers and sellers to account than we do for real guns. And the point that Senator Sanders keeps making about how he wouldn't want a mom and pop store, that was not the point of this. And if he can point to any incident where that happened, I would love to hear about it. What was really going on, I'll tell you, because it has a lot to do with New York City. New York City was on the brink of being able to hold manufacturers and dealers accountable through a very carefully crafted legal strategy. The NRA came to their supporters in the Congress and said, stop it now, and Senator Sanders joined those. Thank you, Secretary.
Senator,
Let me just reiterate. Just to reiterate so there is no confusion. Decades ago, before it was popular, in a rural state with no gun control, Bernie Sanders said, let's ban assault weapons, not see them distributed in the United States of America.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn it over to Errol Lewis of New York One, Time Warner Cable News.
Secretary Clinton, the 1994 crime bill that you supported added 100,000 police officers across the country and banned certain assault weapons. It also imposed tougher prison sentences and eliminated federal funding for inmate education. Looking at the bill as a whole, do you believe it was a net positive, or do you think it was a mistake?
Well, I think that it had some positive aspects to it, and you mentioned some of them. The Violence Against Women Act, which has been a very important piece of legislation, in my opinion. And it also did some things which were to provide more opportunities for young people. So if we were to have the balance sheet, on one side, there are some positive actions and changes. On the other side, there were decisions that were made that now we must revisit and we have to correct. I think that sentences got much too long. The original idea was not that we would increase sentences for nonviolent, low-level offenders, but once the federal government did what it did, states piled on. So we have a problem. And the very first speech I gave in this campaign was about what I will do to reform the criminal justice system and to end the mass incarceration. So I think that if all of us go back and look at where we were, Senator Sanders voted for the crime bill, and he said the same thing. There were some good things and things that we have to change and learn from. So that's how I see it, and I think we ought to be putting our attention on forging a consensus to make the changes that will divert more people from the criminal justice system to tackle systemic racism and divert people in the beginning.
Now, earlier this year, a South Carolina voter told your daughter, Chelsea, quote, I think a lot of African Americans want to hear, you know what, we made a mistake. Chelsea said she's heard you apologize, but went on to say that if the voter hadn't heard it, then, quote, it's clearly insufficient. Do you regret your advocacy for the crime bill?
Well, look, I supported the crime bill. My husband has apologized. He was the president who actually signed it. Senator Sanders voted for it. I'm sorry for the consequences that were unintended and that have had a very unfortunate impact on people's lives. I've seen the results of what has happened in families and in communities. That's why I chose to make my very first speech a year ago on this issue, Errol, because I want to focus the attention of our country and to make the changes we need to make. And I also want people, especially I want white people to recognize that there is systemic racism. It's also in employment, it's in housing, but it is in the criminal justice system as well.
Senator Sanders, earlier this week at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, you called out President Clinton for defending Secretary Clinton's use of the term super predator back in the 90s when she supported the crime bill. Why did you call him out?
Because it was a racist term and everybody knew it was a racist term. Look.
Boom.
Much of what Secretary Clinton said was right. He had a crime bill. I voted for it. It had the Violence Against Women Act in it. When mayor of Burlington, we worked very hard to try to eliminate domestic violence. This took us a good step forward. We're talking about the weapon that killed the children in Sandy Hook. This banned assault weapons, not insignificant. But where we are today is we have a broken criminal justice system. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth. And in my view, what we have got to do is rethink the system from the bottom on up. And that means, for a start, and we don't talk about this, the media doesn't talk about it, You got 51% of African American kids today who graduated high school who are unemployed or underemployed. You know what I think? Maybe we invest in jobs and education for those kids, not jails and incarceration. And I'll tell you what else. And I'll tell you what else I think. And that is we have got, and this is a difference between the Secretary and myself as I understand it, we have got to have the guts to rethink the so-called war on drugs. Too many lives have been destroyed because people possess marijuana, millions over a 30-year period. And that is why I believe we should take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act.
Thank you. Let's get Secretary Clinton's response.
Well, look, I think that as Senator Sanders said about what I said, I will say about what he said. I think that we recognize that we have a set of problems that we cannot ignore and we must address. And that is why I have been promoting for my entire adult life, I think, the idea of investing early in kids, early childhood education, universal pre-K, like what Mayor de Blasio brought to New York. We have got to help more kids get off to a good start. That's why I want a good teacher in a good school for every child, regardless of the zip code that child lives in, and to be really focused on how we build ladders of opportunity and tear down these barriers that stand in the way
time's up,
of people
Secretary
getting
Clinton.
ahead.
Senator Sanders, I have a question for you related to this. So you've said that by the end of your first term as president, the U.S. will no longer lead the world in mass incarceration. To fulfill that promise, you'd have to release roughly 500,000 prisoners. How are you going to do that, since the vast majority of American prisoners are not under federal jurisdiction?
We're going to work with state governments all over this country. And you know what? In a very divided Congress and a very divided politics in America, actually the one area where there is some common ground is conservatives understand that it's insane to be spending $80 billion a year locking up 2.2 million people. With federal and presidential leadership, we will work with state governments to make sure that people are released from jail under strong supervision, that they get the kind of job training and education they need so they can return to their communities. On this one, Errol, actually, I think you're going to see progressive and conservative support. We can do it if we're prepared to be bold.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Secretary. We have to take a quick commercial break. We have a lot more questions for Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders right after this.
We absolutely have to take a break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the live Progressive Army coverage of the Democratic debate. Wow. So a lot of disappointing things in that first session, but then there were some places where he hammered, Bernie Sanders hammered. But I think the award goes to the moderators for that first segment. What do you guys think?
I want to say that Bernie Sanders should have definitely stayed a lot stronger than he was. Like, what really bothered me was he walked into the crime bill by admitting that he also voted for it. Let her bring that up. What you should have did was leave her all alone out there. Don't go and join hands with her. She's all alone. She needs to stick out there, and that's that. You don't need to join her out there. And what he also should have done is pointed out the fact that this bill passed on its second attempt. It failed the first time, and he was against it both times. Hillary Clinton lobbied for it the first time. They couldn't get it through. They only got it through with those amendments, but she supported it even without those things.
Wow. Wow. That's a good point. Good. Noah, what do you think? Noah, I don't have you. Hang on a second. Let me see if it's my fault or if it's yeah, your line is wide open, and I don't have you. I know. Keep trying. All right, so while Noah gets that figured out, the gun issue. Now, I'm going back and forth just a little bit with Anoa on the gun issue, and maybe I should hold the gun issue until her microphone comes and gets right. So let me pivot from the gun issue, and I'm going to hold that until Anoa's microphone. No, I still don't hear you. So there was the 94 crime bill that we just ended on. There was the issue of breaking up the banks. This is where he disappointed me the most. I'm sorry, but you got to have that example. You got to at least know the Elizabeth Warren example of how Hillary Clinton changed her mind on a particular policy because once she was the first lady, she had no responsibility to lobbyists. And once she became a senator, she began to be lobbied and changed her position on, I believe it was the bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's it. Bring it up.
So like, why he should have. Bernie Sanders needs about 25% more technocrat. He needs some, not a lot. He doesn't need to be, I can't even think of a modern technocrat, to be honest with you. Bill Clinton tried to be a technocrat.
Joseph Stiglitz.
Yeah, okay. He doesn't need to go that far, right? He doesn't need to be that much, but maybe 10% of that would bring so much more validity to what he's saying. What do you think?
Let me tack something on to that. Like, to be honest with you, her opposition to breaking up the banks right now, that is proof of what that money has bought. He is not taking any of that money. He wants to break up the banks immediately and stop all their fraudulent activity and enact an environment which is easily regulatable, or it's easy to regulate. And you notice that she's taking that money and she takes the exact opposite stance. That is my proof. Of what the lobbyist money has done. Look at where your stance is now in comparison to mine.
Let's go to Anoa. Anoa, is your mic back up? No, I don't.
Just reconnect to the channel.
Yeah.
I'll have to come back in.
Yeah, I would say go out, come back in, unplug your mic, plug it back in, and then come back in. We're gonna get you a new computer as soon as possible. So yeah, so that's a perfect example. And then the fact that she's saying there's no banks too big to fail, and damn it, on the front page of the New York Times, 5 banks too big to fail. You know what I mean? The regulators have come to this after all this. 5 banks are too big to fail, and she's online on stage saying there's no banks too big. Hillary, it's right there, and there's like this blind. No, it's not a blind spot. It's an intentional blind spot of her supporters who really don't care about the fact that let's go to $15 an hour. Has anybody ever heard Hillary Clinton support $15 an hour?
No.
Okay.
And she in the same stroke, she actually backtracked and said, well, she supports 10, but if somebody wants to, or 12, but if somebody wants to go farther, she supports that too. Well, why don't you just make it 15?
We're going back live.
Secretary Clinton. Senator Sanders has said you are in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry. You say you're sick and tired of him lying about your record. What are his lies?
Well, let me start by saying we need to talk about this issue, and we should talk about it in terms of the extraordinary threats that climate change pose to our country and our world. And that's why for the last many years, both in the Senate and as Secretary of State, it's been a big part of my commitment to see what could be done. But there has never been any doubt that when I was a senator, I joined with others to try to get rid of the subsidies for big oil. And I have proposed that again, because that's what I think needs to be done as we transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And everyone who's looked at this independently, the Washington Post and others who give us both hard times when called for on facts, have said that this is absolutely an incorrect, false charge. So we both have relatively small amounts of contributions from people who work for fossil fuel companies, best we can tell from the reports that are done. But that is not being supported by big oil, and I think it's important to distinguish that. And let's talk about what each of us has proposed to try to combat greenhouse gas emissions and put us on the fastest track possible to clean energy.
Thank you. We're going to get to that too, but I want you to respond, Senator.
It is one thing, as the Secretary indicated, to talk about workers. I'm sure I have contributions, you have contributions from workers in every industry in the country. But as I understand it, 43 lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry maxed out, gave the maximum amount of money to Secretary Clinton's campaign. Now, that's not saying, and then some people say, well, you know, given the hundreds of millions of dollars she raised, it's a small amount. That's true. But that does not mean to say that the lobbyists there thought she was a pretty good bet on this issue. Now, what I think is, when we look at climate change now, we have got to realize that this is a global environmental crisis of unprecedented urgency. And it is not good enough, you know, if we, God forbid, were attacked tomorrow, the whole country would rise up and say, we got an enemy out there, we got to do something about it. That was what 9/11 was about. We have an enemy out there, and that enemy is going to cause drought and floods and extreme weather disturbances. There's going to be international conflict. I am proud, Wolf, that I have introduced the most comprehensive climate change legislation, including a tax on carbon, something I don't believe Secretary Clinton supports.
Go ahead and respond.
Well, let's talk about the global environmental crisis. Starting in 2009, as your Secretary of State, I worked with President Obama to bring China and India to the table for the very first time, to get a commitment out of them that they would begin to address their own greenhouse gas emissions. I continued to work on that throughout the 4 years as Secretary of State, and I was very proud that President Obama and America led the way to the agreement that was finally reached in Paris, with 195 nations committing to take steps to actually make a difference in climate change. And I was surprised and disappointed when Senator Sanders attacked the agreement, said it was not enough, it didn't go far enough. You know, at some point, putting together 195 countries, I know a little bit about that, was a major accomplishment, and our president led the effort to protect our world.
Go ahead,
and he deserves our appreciation, not our criticism.
Let's talk about that. When you were Secretary of State, you also worked hard to expand fracking to countries all over the world. But the issue here, of course the agreement is a step forward, but you know agreements and I know agreements, there's a lot of paper there. We've got to get beyond paper right now. We have got to lead the world in transforming our energy system, not tomorrow, but yesterday. And what that means, Wolf, it means having the guts to take on the fossil fuel industry. Now, I am on board legislation says, you know what? We ain't going to excavate for fossil fuel on public land. That's not Secretary Clinton's position. Let us support a tax on carbon, not Secretary Clinton's position.
Go ahead and respond.
Well, I'm a little bewildered about how to respond when you have an agreement which gives you the framework to actually take the action that would have only come about because under the Obama administration, in the face of implacable hostility from the Republicans in Congress, President Obama moved forward on gas mileage. He moved forward on the Clean Power Plan. He has moved forward on so many of the fronts that he could, given the executive actions that he was able to take. And you know, I'm getting a little bit concerned here because, you know, I really believe that the president has done an incredible job against great odds and deserves to be supported. Now, it's easy to diagnose the problem. It's harder to do something about the problem.
Thank you, Secretary. We'll continue on this. Errol Lewis, go ahead with your question. We're going to continue on this. Errol, go ahead.
Okay, Secretary Clinton, as Secretary of State, you also pioneered a program to promote fracking around the world, as you described. Fracking, of course, a way of extracting natural gas. Now, as a candidate for president, you say that by the time you're done with all your rules and regulations, fracking will be restricted in many places around the country. Why have you changed your view on fracking?
No, I don't think I've changed my view on what we need to do to go from where we are, where the world is heavily dependent on coal and oil, but principally coal, to where we need to be, which is clean, renewable energy, and one of the bridge fuels is natural gas. And so for both economic and environmental and strategic reasons, it was American policy to try to help countries get out from under the constant use of coal, building coal plants all the time. Also, to get out from under, especially if they were in Europe, the pressure from Russia, which has been incredibly intense. So we did say natural gas is a bridge. We want to cross that bridge as quickly as possible, because in order to deal with climate change, we have got to move as rapidly as we can. That's why I've set big goals. I want to see us deploy 500 million more solar panels by the end of my first term, and enough clean energy to provide electricity to every home in America within 10 years. So I have big, bold goals. But I know in order to get from where we are, where the world is still burning way too much coal, where the world is still too intimidated by countries and providers like Russia, we have got to make a very firm but decisive move in the direction of clean energy.
All right, here is a real difference. This is a difference between understanding that we have a crisis of historical consequence here, and incrementalism and those little steps are not enough. Not right now, not on climate change. Now, the truth is, as Secretary of State, Secretary Clinton actively supported fracking technology around the world. Second of all, right now we have got to tell the fossil fuel industry that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And that means, and I would ask you to respond, are you in favor of a tax on carbon so that we can transit away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy at the level and speed we need to do?
You know, I have laid out a set of actions that build on what President Obama was able to accomplish, building on the Clean Power Plan, which is currently under attack by fossil fuels and the right in the Supreme Court, which is one of the reasons why we need to get the Supreme Court justice that President Obama has nominated to be confirmed so that we can actually continue to make progress. I don't take a backseat to your legislation that you've introduced that you haven't been able to get passed. I want to do what we can do to actually make progress in dealing with the crisis. That's exactly what I have proposed.
Okay, thank you,
and
Secretary.
My approach, I think, is going to get us there faster without tying us up into political knots with a Congress that still would not support what you are proposing.
Senator Sanders, you've said that climate change is the greatest threat to our nation's security.
Secretary Clinton did not answer one simple question. Are you for a tax on carbon or not? Yes.
I have a question for you. You've said that climate change is the greatest threat to our nation's security. You've called for a nationwide ban on fracking. You've also called for phasing out all nuclear power in the U.S. But wouldn't those proposals drive the country back to coal and oil and actually undermine your fight against global warming?
Look, here's where we are. Let me reiterate. We have a global crisis. Pope Francis reminded us that we are on a suicide course. Our legislation understands, Errol, that there will be economic dislocation. It is absolutely true. There will be some people who lose their job, and we build into our legislation an enormous amount of money to protect those workers. It is not their fault that fossil fuels are destroying our climate. But we have got to stand up and say right now, as we would if we were attacked by some military force, we have got to move urgently, and boldly. What does that mean?
Senator jobs are one thing, but with less than 6% of all U.S. energy coming from solar, wind, and geothermal, and 20% of U.S. power coming from nuclear, if you phase out all of that, how do you make up that deficit?
You don't phase it all out tomorrow, and you certainly don't phase nuclear out tomorrow, but this is what you do. What you do is say that we are going to have a massive program, and I had introduced legislation for 10 million solar rooftops. We can put probably millions of people to work retrofitting and weatherizing buildings all over this country, rebuilding our rail system, our mass transit system. if we approach this era as if we were literally in a war, you know, in 1941, under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we moved within 3 years to rebuild our economy to defeat Nazism and Japanese imperialism. That is exactly the kind of approach we need right now. Lead the world.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn to another critically important issue, the issue of national security and foreign policy. Secretary Clinton, President Obama says the worst mistake in office that he made over these past 7.5 years was not preparing for Libya after Muammar Gaddafi was removed. You were as Secretary of State. Aren't you also responsible for that?
Well, let me say, I think we did a great deal to help the Libyan people after Gaddafi's demise, and here's what we did. We helped them hold 2 successful elections, something that is not easy, which they did very well because they had a pent-up desire to try to chart their own future after 42 years of dictatorship. I was very proud of that. We got rid of the chemical weapons stockpile that Gaddafi had, getting it out of Libya, getting it away from militias or terrorist groups. We also worked to help them set up their government. We sent a lot of American experts there. We offered to help them secure their borders, to train a new military. They, at the end, when it came to security issues, Wolf, did not want troops from any other country, not just us, European or other countries, in Libya. And so we were caught in a very difficult position. They could not provide security on their own, which we could see, and we told them that, but they didn't want to have others helping to provide that security. And the result has been a clash between different parts of the country, terrorists taking up some locations in the country, and we can't walk away from that. We need to be working with European and Arab partners, with the United Nations, in order to continue to try to support them. The Libyan people deserve a chance at democracy and self-government, and I, as president, will keep trying to give that to
Senator,
them.
go ahead.
According to the New York Times, for President Obama, this was a pretty tough call, like a 51-49 call. Do you overthrow Gaddafi, who, of course, was a horrific dictator? But the New York Times told us it was Secretary Clinton who led the effort for that regime change. And this is the same type of mentality that supported the war in Iraq. Look, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein are brutal, murdering thugs. No debate about that. But what we have got to do, and what the president was saying, is we didn't think thoroughly about what happens the day after you get rid of these dictators. Regime change often has unintended consequences. In Iraq and in Libya right now, where ISIS has a very dangerous foothold. And I think if you study the whole history of American involvement in regime change, you see that quite often.
Secretary, we're going to let you respond.
Yes, well, I would just point out that there was a vote in the Senate as to whether or not the United States should support the efforts by the Libyan people to protect themselves against the threats, the genocidal threats coming from Gaddafi, and whether we should go to the United Nations to seek Security Council support. Senator Sanders voted for that, and that's exactly what we did.
No.
We went to the United Nations. Yes, he did. We went to the United Nations Security Council. We got support from the Security Council, and we then supported the efforts of our European and Arab allies and partners. This was a request made to our government by the Europeans and by the Arabs because of their great fear of what chaos in Syria would do to them. And if you want to know what chaos does, not just to the people inside, but the people on the borders, look at Syria. Nobody stood up to Assad and removed him, and we have had a far greater disaster in Syria than we are currently dealing with right now.
Senator, go ahead.
Secretary Clinton made this charge in previous debates, and just repeating it doesn't make it true. What you were talking about is what I think was what they call the unanimous consent. You know what that is? Where basically, do we support Libya moving to democracy? Well, you know what? I surely have always supported Libya moving to democracy. But please do not confuse that with your active effort for regime change without contemplating what happened the day after that. Totally different issue.
Well, that
second of all, if I might, in terms of Syria.
Senator, let her respond to that, then we'll get to that. Go ahead, Secretary.
There was also in that a reference to the Security Council, and I know you're not shy when you oppose something, Senator, so yes, it was unanimous. That's exactly right, including you. And what we did was to try to provide support for our European and Arab allies and partners. The decision was the president's. Did I do the due diligence? Did I talk to everybody I could talk to? Did I visit every capital and then report back to the president? Yes, I did. That's what a Secretary of State does. But at the end of the day, those are the decisions that are made by the president to in any way use American military power. And the president made that decision. And yes, we did try, without success because of the Libyans' obstruction to our efforts, but we did try and we will continue to try
Secretary.
to help the Libyans.
Go ahead, Senator.
If you listen, 2 points. Number one, yes, 100-0 in the Senate voted for democracy in Libya, and I would vote for that again. But that is very different from getting actively involved to overthrow and bring about regime change without fully understanding what the consequence of that regime change would be. Second of all, I know you keep referring to Barack Obama all night here, but you in Syria talked about a no-fly zone, which the president certainly does not support, nor do I support, because A, it will cost an enormous sums of money. Second of all, it runs the risk of getting us sucked into perpetual warfare in that region. Thirdly, when we talk about Syria right now, no debate, like Gaddafi, like Saddam Hussein, Assad is another brutal, murdering dictator. But right now, our fight is to destroy ISIS first and to get rid of Assad second.
Well, I think Senator Sanders has just reinforced my point. Yes, when I was Secretary of State, I did urge, along with the Department of Defense and the CIA, that we seek out, vet, and train and arm Syrian opposition figures so that they could defend themselves against Assad. The president said no. Now, that's how it works. People who work for the president make recommendations, and then the president makes the decision. So I think it's only fair to look at where we are in Syria today. And yes, I do still support a no-fly zone because I think we need to put in safe havens for those poor Syrians who are fleeing both Assad and ISIS.
Let's stay
and
on
have
national
some place
security.
that they can be safe.
Staying on national security, Dana Bash has a question.
Senator Sanders, in 1997, you said this about NATO. You said, quote, "It is not the time to continue wasting tens of billions of dollars helping to defend Europe, let alone assuming more than our share of any costs associated with expanding NATO." Do you still feel that way?
Well, what I believe, if my memory is correct here, we spend about 75% of the entire cost of the military aspect of NATO. Given the fact that France has a very good healthcare system and free public education, college education for their people, the UK has a good national health service, and they also provide fairly reasonable higher education. You know what? Yeah, I do believe that the countries of Europe should pick up more of the burden for their defense. Yes, I do.
And just following up, Senator Sanders, Donald Trump also argues that NATO is unfair economically to the U.S. because America pays a disproportionate share. So how is what you say about NATO and your proposal different than his?
Well, you got to ask Trump. All I can tell you is with a huge deficit, with 47 million people living in poverty, with our inner cities collapsing, yeah, I do think countries like Germany and UK and France and European countries whose economy, or at least its standard of living and healthcare and education, they're doing pretty well. So I would not be embarrassed as President of the United States to say to our European allies, you know what? The United States of America cannot just support your economies. You got to put up your own fair share of the defense burden. Nothing wrong with that.
Secretary Clinton.
I support our continuing involvement in NATO, and it is important to ask for our NATO allies to pay more of the cost. There is a requirement that they should be doing so, and I believe that needs to be enforced. But there's a larger question here. NATO has been the most successful military alliance in probably human history. It has bound together across the Atlantic countries that are democracies, that have many of the same values and interests. And now we need to modernize it and move it into the 21st century to serve as that head of our defense operations in Europe when it comes to terrorism and other threats that we face.
Madam
So,
Secretary,
yes, of course they should be paying more, but that doesn't mean if they don't, we leave, because I don't think that's in America's interest.
That's going to be part of my question to you is, to that point, there are 28 countries in the alliance, and the United States gives more money to NATO's budget than 21 of those countries combined. If they don't agree to pay more, as you suggested, then what would you do as Commander-in-Chief?
I will stay in NATO. I will stay in NATO, and we will continue to look for missions and other kinds of programs that they will support. Remember, NATO was with us in Afghanistan. Most of the member countries also lost soldiers and civilians in Afghanistan. They came to our rallying defense after 9/11. That meant a lot. And yes, we have to work out the financial aspects of it, but let's not forget what's really happening. With Russia being more aggressive, making all kinds of intimidating moves toward the Baltic countries. We've seen what they've done in eastern Ukraine. We know how they want to rewrite the map of Europe. It is not in our interest. Think of how much it would cost if Russia's aggression were not deterred because NATO was there on the front lines, making it clear they could not move forward.
Senator, let's talk about the U.S. relationship with Israel. Senator Sanders, you maintain that Israel's response in Gaza in 2014 was, quote, disproportionate and led to the unnecessary loss of innocent life. What do you say to those who believe that Israel has a right to defend itself as it sees fit?
Well, as somebody who spent many months of my life when I was a kid in Israel, who has family in Israel, of course Israel has a right not only to defend themselves, but to live in peace and security without fear of terrorist attack. That is not a debate. But what you just read, yeah, I do believe that. Israel was subjected to terrorist attacks, has every right in the world to destroy terrorism. But we had in the Gaza area, not a very large area, some 10,000 civilians who were wounded and some 1,500 who were killed. Now, if you're asking me, not just me, but countries all over the world, was that a disproportionate attack? The answer is, I believe it was. And let me say something else. Let me say something else. As somebody who is 100% pro-Israel, in the long run, and this is not going to be easy, God only knows, but in the long run, if we are ever going to bring peace to that region which has seen so much hatred and so much war, we are going to have to treat the Palestinian people with respect and dignity. The one is not to say that right now in Gaza, unemployment is somewhere around 40%. You got a lot of that area continuous and hasn't been rebuilt. Decimated, houses decimated, healthcare decimated. schools decimated. I believe the United States and the rest of the world have got to work together to help the Palestinian people. That does not make me anti-Israel. That paves the way, I think,
Thank you, Senator.
for an approach that works in the Middle East.
Thank you. Secretary Clinton, do you agree with Senator Sanders that Israel overreacts to Palestinian attacks and that in order for there to be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, Israel must, quote, end its disproportionate responses?
I negotiated the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in November of 2012. I did it in concert with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, based in Ramallah. I did it with the then Muslim Brotherhood President, Morsi, based in Cairo, working closely with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet. I can tell you right now, because I have been there with Israeli officials going back more than 25 years, that they do not seek this kind of attacks. They do not invite rockets raining down on their towns and villages. They do not believe that there should be a constant incitement by Hamas, aided and abetted by Iran, against Israel. And so when it came time, after they had taken the incoming rockets, taken the assaults and ambushes on their soldiers, and they called and told me, I was in Cambodia, that they were getting ready to have to invade Gaza again because they couldn't find anybody to talk to tell them to stop it. I flew all night. I got there. I negotiated that. So I don't know how you run a country when you are under constant threat, terrorist attack, rockets coming at you. You have a right to defend yourself. That does not mean that you don't take appropriate precautions. And I understand that there's always second guessing anytime there is a war. It also does not mean that we should not continue to do everything we can to try to reach a two-state solution, which would give the Palestinians the rights, and just let me finish, the rights and the autonomy that they deserve. And let me say this, if Yasser Arafat had agreed with my husband at Camp David in the late 1990s to the offer that Prime Minister Barak put on the table, we would have had a Palestinian state
Senator,
for 15 years already.
Go ahead, Senator.
I don't think that anybody would suggest that Israel invites or welcomes missiles flying into their country. That is not the issue. And you evaded the answer. You evaded the question. The question is not does Israel have a right to respond, not does Israel have a right to go after terrorists and destroy terrorism. That's not the debate. Was their response disproportionate? I believe that it was. You have not answered that.
Well, I will certainly be willing to answer it. I think I did answer it by saying that, of course, there have to be precautions taken, but even the most independent analyst will say the way that Hamas places its weapons, the way that it often has its fighters in civilian garb, it is terrible. I'm not saying it's anything other than terrible, but it would be great. Remember, Israel left Gaza. They took out all the Israelis. They turned the keys over to the Palestinian people. And what happened? Hamas took over Gaza. So instead of having a thriving economy with the kind of opportunities that the children of the Palestinians deserve, we have a terrorist haven that is getting more and more rockets shipped in from Iran and elsewhere.
I read Secretary Clinton's speech before AIPAC. I heard virtually no discussion at all about the needs of the Palestinian people. Almost none in that speech. So here is the issue. Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. But long term, there will never be peace in that region unless the United States plays a role, an even-handed role, trying to bring people together and recognizing the serious problems that exist among the Palestinian people. That is what I believe the world wants us to do, and that's the kind of leadership that we have got to exercise.
Well, if I want to add, again, describing the problem is a lot easier than trying to solve it. And I have been involved, both as First Lady with my husband's efforts, as a senator supporting the efforts that even the Bush administration was undertaking, and as Secretary of State for President Obama. I'm the person who held the last 3 meetings between the President of the Palestinian Authority and the Prime Minister of Israel. There were only 4 of us in the room: Netanyahu, Abbas, George Mitchell, and me. 3 long meetings. And I was absolutely focused on what was fair and right for the Palestinians. I was absolutely focused on what we needed to do to make sure that the Palestinian people had the right to self-government.
Thank you.
And I believe that as president, I will be able to continue to make progress and get an agreement that will be fair both to the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Final word,
without
Senator. Go ahead.
ever undermining Israel's security.
There comes a time when, if we pursue justice and peace, we are going to have to say that Netanyahu is not right all of the time.
Well,
Secretary.
I have spoken about and written at some length the very candid conversations I've had with him and other Israeli leaders. Nobody is saying that any individual leader is always right. But it is a difficult position if you are, from whatever perspective, trying to seek peace, trying to create the conditions for peace, when there is a terrorist group embedded in Gaza that does not want to see you exist. That is a very
Senator, go ahead.
difficult challenge.
You gave a major speech to AIPAC, which obviously deals with the Middle East crisis, and you barely mentioned the Palestinians. And I think, again, it is a complicated issue, and God knows for decades presidents, including President Clinton and others, Jimmy Carter and others, have tried to do the right thing. All that I am saying is we cannot continue to be one-sided. There are 2 sides to the issue.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Secretary. We have to take another quick break for much more on the CNN Democratic presidential debate.
Yes, we
Live
do.
From Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn in the house.
Right after this.
All right.
I can't with her. I just can't.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Democratic live coverage by the Progressive Army. Well, a few members of the Progressive Army. I'm joined by Anoa Changa and Nick Nolan. What did you guys think about that last segment? Anoa, you're back, so what's up?
Yay. I can't with her. She cannot, she tries to play both sides. Like, you were in a televised, you gave a televised speech to AIPAC that was extremely, not only pro-Israel, but just like anti anyone that would get in the way. It's like the type of speech you give when you're with your squad and someone has messed with your girl. Like, there's no wiggle room. In anything that she said, there was no wiggle room. There was no indication or concern for many of the human rights issues that are raised by the Israeli occupation. Senator Sanders has given more balanced statements. I know some of the comments in chat room has said, he's pretty reasonable as far as American, politicians go. That's not saying much in terms of the international community, but it's still his approach, and it's way more balanced. And she's just not going to be pinned down. I love how she talks about her First Lady experience, but then she doesn't really have First Lady experience. You can't have it both ways, and I really wish somebody would get her on that.
But she can. She is all night. She's both the attacker and the victim. She's the victimizer and the victim at the same time. That's the luxury of her privilege. She has this unbelievable way of being able to be both against $12, against $15 an hour, and for $12 an hour.
That conversation was so frustrating. That conversation was so frustrating. And as I point out to people, she has said previously that she did support the $15 minimum wage in her state of New York. She has said that, right? You guys can go back, you can look. There are articles from like July maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she has not, as she tried to portray,
right,
been for $15 nationwide. And to say she supports the Fight for 15 movement, which if people didn't know, today was a national, well, actually it was an international Fight 15 day of action, right? There was a strikes planned in 300 cities in the United States, plus several places internationally. Right, so today on a national day of action, for her to try to portray that she was somehow, for them and what they're trying to do. I mean, if she doesn't understand or doesn't listen to anything the organizers are saying, they're for $15 everywhere. Yay, we get it. UPMC in Pittsburgh has $15 an hour now. New York is going to phase it in. California, in some ways, not everybody. There's some stuff for California too that's not completely on the up and up, but that's a whole nother conversation. Right. But she's disingenuous.
Let me ask you guys this: what do you think? How was it? It's so weird to me that the Jewish candidate is actually more pro-Palestine, and of course he's pro-Israel, but he has a nuance and it seems like a balanced position. More so than Hillary Clinton, who is not Jewish. That's just what kind of world this is. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Let me hop in on this here. She said that Israel left Gaza and then Hamas came and took it over. Hamas was actually elected by the Palestinians in an election. That's not them just taking over. And right after they did that, the United States punished the Gaza Strip.
Well, two things, Nick. Unplug your microphone, plug it back in. We got some distortion, but you got to understand, we only like democracy when it elects people that we approve of. Outside of that, then it's a takeover, right? As compared to our state-sanctioned coups that we often, But anyway, I digress. Go ahead. Let's see if your mic's better.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little distorted. Go for it, Noah, while he does the on and off thing. And actually, we're back.
Oh well.
Welcome back to the CNN presidential debate. We're here in Brooklyn.
Nope.
Secretary, Senator.
That's not what I want. Don't want to show that.
Talk about major reforms to college tuition, healthcare, and Social Security, all of which take significant changes from Congress currently controlled by Republicans. Senator Sanders, you're promising healthcare and free college for all, and those plans would be met with both political and practical challenges. The Nonpartisan Committee for Responsible Federal Budget says your initiatives would cost up to $28 trillion, and even after massive tax increases, that would add as much as $15 trillion to the national debt. How is this fiscally responsible?
Well, first of all, I disagree with that study. There are many economists who come up with very, very different numbers. For example, we are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people. And yet we end up spending almost 3 times what the British do, 50% more than the French. My proposal, a Medicare for all single-payer program, will save middle-class families many thousands of dollars a year in their health care costs. Public colleges and universities tuition-free? Damn right. That is exactly what we should be doing. And I pay for that by telling Wall Street that, yeah, we are going to have a tax on Wall Street speculation, which will bring in more than enough money to provide free tuition at public colleges and universities and lower the outrageous level of student debt. Wolf, we have seen in the last 30 years a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 0.1%. The establishment does not like this idea, but yes, I am determined to transfer that money back to the working families of this country.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary, go ahead and respond.
Well, again, I absolutely agree with the diagnosis that we've got to do much more to finish the work of getting universal health care coverage, something that I've worked on for 25 years. Before there was something called Obamacare, there was something called Hillary Care, and we're now at 90% of coverage. I'm going to get us to 100%. And with respect to college, I think we have to make college affordable. We are pricing out middle class, working, and poor families. There's no doubt about that. But I do think when you make proposals and you're running for president, you should be held accountable for whether or not the numbers add up and whether or not the plans are actually going to work. And just very, very briefly on health care, most of the people who have analyzed what Senator Sanders put out, remember he had a plan for about, I don't know, 18, 20 years. He changed in the middle of this campaign. He put out another plan. People have been analyzing the new plan. And there is no doubt by those who have analyzed it, progressive economists, health economists, and the like, that it would pose an incredible burden, not just on the budget, but on individuals. In fact, the Washington Post called it a train wreck for the poor. A working woman on Medicaid who already has health insurance would be expected to pay about $2,300. The same for free college. The free college offer, you know, my late father said, if somebody promises you something for free, read the fine print. You read the fine print,
Secretary.
and here's what it says. The fine print says this, that it will, the federal government will cover 2/3 of the cost and require the states, even those led by
Senator,
Republican governors, to carry out with the remaining 1/3 of the cost.
We are not a country that has the courage to stand up to big money and do what has to be done for the working families of this country. Secretary Clinton will have to explain to the people of our country how it could be that every other major country on earth manages to guarantee health care to all of their people, spending significantly less per capita than we can. I live 50 miles away from Canada, you know? It's not some kind of communist authoritarian country. They're doing okay. They got a health care system that guarantees health care to all people. We can do the same. In terms of public colleges and universities, please don't tell me that we cannot do what many other countries around the world are doing. Kids should not be punished and leave school deeply in debt for what crime? For trying to get an education.
Thank you,
yes,
Senator.
Well,
we are going to pay for it.
Secretary Clinton, go ahead.
We have a difference of opinion. We both want to get to universal health care coverage. I did stand up to the special interests and the powerful forces, the health insurance companies and the drug companies, and perhaps that's why I am so much in favor of supporting President Obama's signature accomplishment with the Affordable Care Act, because I know how hard it was to get that passed, even with a Democratic Congress. So rather than letting the Republicans repeal it, or rather starting all over again, trying to throw the country into another really contentious debate, let's make the Affordable Care Act work for everybody. Let's get to 100% coverage. Let's get the cost down, and let's guarantee health care.
Secretary, let's talk about Social Security, another critically important issue. Senator Sanders has challenged you to give a clear answer when it comes to extending the life of Social Security and expanding benefits. Are you prepared to lift the cap on taxable income, which currently stands at $118,500? Yes or no, would you lift the cap?
I have said repeatedly, Wolf, I am going to make the wealthy pay into Social Security to extend the Social Security Trust Fund. That is one way. If that is the way that we pursue, I will follow that. But there are other ways. We should be looking at taxing passive income by wealthy people. We should be looking at taxing all of their investments. But here's the real issue, because I've heard this, I've seen the reports of it. I have said from the very beginning, we are going to protect Social Security. I was one of the leaders in the fight against Bush when he was trying to privatize Social Security. But we also, in addition to extending the trust fund, which I am absolutely determined to do, we've got to help people who are not being taken care of now. And because Social Security started in the 1930s, a lot of women have been left out and left behind. And it's time that we provide more benefits for widows, divorcees, for caregivers, for women who deserve more from the Social Security system, and that will be my highest priority.
Go ahead, Senator.
You didn't answer the question.
Interesting comment, but you didn't answer the question.
I did. If that's
no,
the
you
way
didn't.
yes, I did.
Can I answer?
I did answer the
please?
Well, don't put words into my mouth and say something that's not
Go ahead,
accurate.
Senator.
All right. Essentially, what you described is my legislation, which includes passive income. Now, here is the issue. Your answer has been the same year after year. In fact, the idea that I'm bringing forth, I have to admit it, it wasn't my idea. It was Barack Obama's idea in 2008. Exact same idea. He called for lifting the cap, which is now higher. It's at 118, and starting at 250 and going on up. If you do that, you're going to extend the life of Social Security for 58 years. You will significantly expand benefits by $1,300 a year for seniors and disabled vets under $16,000 a year. What's wrong with that? Are you prepared to support it?
I have supported it. We are in vigorous agreement here, Senator. I think it's important to point out that, we're having a discussion about the best way to raise money from wealthy people to extend the Social Security Trust Fund. Think about what the other side wants to do. They're calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme. They still want to privatize it. In fact, their whole idea is to turn over the Social Security Trust Fund to Wall Street, something you and I would never let happen. So, yes, we both want to make sure Social Security is vibrant and well-funded and helps the people at the bottom.
Senator, go ahead.
Campaign of challenging, if I hear you correctly, Madam Secretary, you are now coming out finally in favor of lifting the cap on taxable income and extending and expanding Social Security. If that is the case, welcome on board. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Errol Lewis, go ahead.
We are going.
Secretary.
As he said, I've said the same thing for years. I didn't say anything different tonight. We are going to extend the Social Security Trust Fund. There is still something called Congress. Now, I happen to support Democrats, and I want to get Democrats to take back the majority in the United States Senate. So a lot of what we're talking about can actually be implemented when I am president.
Hold on, Errol,
hold on. I got to admit,
go ahead, Senator.
Maybe I'm a little bit confused. Are you or are you not supporting legislation to lift the cap on taxable income and extend Social Security for 58 years and increase benefits? Yes or no?
I have said yes. We are going to pick the best way or combination. Or a combination of ways.
He is nailing this question.
It's always a little bit challenging because, if Senator Sanders doesn't agree with how you are approaching something, then you are a member of the establishment. Well, let me say this.
Here she goes victimizing.
We are going to extend the Social Security Trust Fund. We've got some good ideas to do it. Let's get a Congress elected that will actually agree with us in doing it.
Go ahead.
Okay, Secretary Clinton, I've got a question for you from a reader of the New York Daily News.
Yes, Secretary, please.
This is a reader of the Daily News who sent us a question for you. Just a second, Senator. Hannah Green wants to know your position, Secretary Clinton, regarding President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. President Obama said earlier this week that he would not withdraw the nomination even after the presidential election. If elected, would you ask the president to withdraw the nomination?
I am not going to contradict the president's strategy on this, and I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. I fully support the president, and I believe that the president is on the right side of both the Constitution and history, and the Senate needs to immediately begin to respond. So I'm going to support the president. When I am president, I will take stock of where we are and move from there.
Senator Sanders.
Well, there's no question. I mean, it really is an outrage. And it just continues the 7.5 years of unbelievable obstructionism we have seen from these right-wing Republicans. I mean, a third grader in America understands the President of the United States has the right to nominate individuals to the U.S. Supreme Court. Apparently, everybody understands that except the Republicans.
So, Senator Sanders, would you ask him to withdraw the nomination?
Yeah, but here's the point. And obviously, I will strongly support that nomination as a member of the Senate. But if elected president, I would ask the president to withdraw that nomination because I think that we need a Supreme Court justice who will make it crystal clear, and this nominee has not yet done that, it's crystal clear that he or she will vote to overturn Citizens United and make sure that American democracy is not undermined.
You know, there is no doubt that the only people that I would ever appoint to the Supreme Court are people who believe that Roe v. Wade is settled law and Citizens United needs to be overturned. And I want to say something about this since we're talking about the Supreme Court and what's at stake. We've had 8 debates before. This is our 9th. We've not had one question about a woman's right to make her own decisions about reproductive health care. Not one question. And in the meantime, we have states, governors, doing everything they can to restrict women's rights. We have a presidential candidate by the name of Donald Trump saying that women should be punished, and we are never asked about this. And to be complete in my concern, Senator Sanders said, with respect to Trump, it was a distraction. I don't think it's a distraction. It goes to the heart of who we are as women, our rights, our autonomy, our ability to make our own decisions. And we need to be talking about that and defending Planned Parenthood from these outrageous attacks.
Your response.
You're looking at a senator and former congressman who proudly has a 100% pro-choice voting record, who will take on those Republican governors who are trying to restrict a woman's right to choose, who will take on those governors right now who are discriminating outrageously against the LGBT community, who comes from a state which led the effort for gay marriage in this country, proudly so.
Thank you, Senator.
Who not only thinks we are not going to not defund Planned Parenthood,
your time is
we've got to expand funding for Planned Parenthood.
Senator Sanders, you've spoken a lot tonight about your votes in Congress. You have been in Congress for over a quarter of the century, and there as an independent, not a Democrat. Now you're seeking the Democratic nomination, but Secretary Clinton has suggested that she's not even sure you are a Democrat. Are you?
Well, why would I be running for the Democratic nomination to be President of the United States? But here is a good point. You know, in virtually all of the general election matchup polls between Trump and Secretary Clinton and Trump and Bernie Sanders, in almost all of those polls, I do better than Secretary Clinton. Both in the CNN poll, I was 20 points ahead of Trump. I think Secretary Clinton was 12 points. And you know why? Because, in fact, a whole lot of people, this may be a shock to the Secretary, but there are a whole lot of independents in this country.
Senator Sanders.
And we are not going to win the White House based on just long-term Democratic votes. We have got to reach out to independents, and I think I am well qualified to do that.
Senator Sanders.
I am in this race as a Democrat. I have raised millions of dollars for my colleagues in the United States Senate to help them get elected. I will do everything that I can to open the Democratic Party to the young people who are flocking in power campaigns.
Senator Sanders, on that very subject, Secretary Clinton mentioned electing a Democratic Congress several times. She says that she raised $15 million for the Democratic Party in the first 3 months of this year. You don't appear to have raised any money for the party. So yesterday you did announce that you would help 3 members of Congress who have endorsed you, but why aren't you doing more now to help the party you say you want to lead?
The truth is, and you can speak to my colleagues, we have raised millions of dollars for the DSCC. I have written letters that have raised just if I may use the word, huge amount of money. So that's just not accurate. But I will also say, and this is important, and maybe the Secretary disagrees with me, but I am proud that millions of young people who previously were not involved in the political process are now coming into it. And I do believe that we have got to open the door of the Democratic Party to those people. And I think the future of the Democratic Party is not simply by raising money from wealthy campaign contributors. I think that the way we are doing it in this campaign, $27 a contribution,
Senator, your time is up.
not being dependent on Wall Street or big money,
Thank you,
that
Senator
is the
Sanders.
future of the
Secretary
Democratic
Clinton.
Party that I want to see.
Well, let us talk about where we are in this race. I have gotten more votes than anybody running, 9.6 million at the last count. That is 2.3 million more than Senator Sanders. And it is 1.4 million more than Donald Trump. And I think you have to look at the facts. And the facts are that I'm putting together a very broad-based, inclusive coalition from the South to the North, from the East to the West, with African Americans, Latinos, women, union households, working people. And I am very proud of the campaign we are running. It is a campaign that will not only capture the Democratic nomination, but a campaign that will defeat whoever the Republicans end up nominating.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator Sanders.
Now I want to say,
Senator Sanders.
I also want to say that I do think it is absolutely critical and incredible that we have so many young people involved in the political process. I applaud all of those who are applauding you, Senator Sanders. We're happy that they are supporting you, that they are passionately committed to you and to the issues. But let me also say, it's going to be important that we unify the Democratic Party when the nomination process has been completed.
Thank you.
And I know,
Secretary Clinton,
I know
very
something
much
about that.
Thank you very much.
Because when I went to the very end of the 2008 campaign with then Senator
Secretary
Obama,
Clinton, you're out of
we
time.
did unify the party, and we did elect a Democratic president.
Senator Sanders, on that note, Senator.
If I might,
Senator,
let me just very briefly say something.
Senator Sanders, please, I want to ask you a question about this, and then you can incorporate that into your response. There are 3 months now between now and the Democratic convention. Your campaign manager says that you will absolutely take the fight to the floor if neither you nor Secretary Clinton clinches the nomination with pledged delegates alone. Do you vow to take this fight to Philadelphia no matter what?
I think we're going to win this nomination, to tell you the truth. Look, let me acknowledge what is absolutely true. Secretary Clinton cleaned our clock in the Deep South, no question about it. We got murdered there. That is the most conservative part of this great country. That's the fact. But you know what? We're out of the Deep South now, and we're moving up. We got here, we're going to California, we got a number of large states there. And having won 7 out of the last 8 caucuses and primaries, having a level of excitement and energy among working people and low-income people, doing better against Donald Trump and the other Republicans in poll after poll than Secretary Clinton is, yeah, I believe that we're going to win this nomination, and I believe we're going to obliterate Donald Trump or whoever the Republican candidate is.
Well, let me say this.
Secretary Clinton, go ahead.
I think it's important for people out there watching this tonight to know that I also have a considerable lead in pledged delegates. And my lead in pledged delegates is actually wider than Barack Obama's lead was over me. And in addition to winning states in the Deep South, we won Florida, Texas, Arizona, Massachusetts, Ohio, Illinois, North Carolina, Missouri. And so I think where we stand today is that we are, in this campaign, very confident and optimistic. But it all comes down to reaching every single voter. I'm not taking anything for granted, or any voter, or any place. So I'm going to work my heart out here in New York until the polls close on Tuesday. I'm going to work in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, and Maryland, all the way through California. And when we end up with the number of delegates we need, we will unite the party and have a unified convention
Senator,
that will go
on
to the general election with.
The reason why in virtually every contest we are winning by very strong margins, younger people, and I'm not just talking about very young, the older you get, the youngest, 45 or younger, is I think people are sensing that establishment politics and dependence on Wall Street and big money interest is really never going to address the crises that we face. And people understand you can't take money from powerful special interests into your PAC and then really expect the American people to believe you're going to stand up to these powerful special interests. So I am very proud of the fact that we have brought millions of new people into the political process.
Thank you, Senator.
Many of whom previously had given up.
Thank you, Senator, very much. The candidates, they will make their final pitches to New York voters right after this.
I think that was his best. All right. I think that was his best exchange right there. What do you guys think? I think that was his best segment. What do you think?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. And Noah, let me make sure both of you are live. What do you guys think? Go ahead, Nick, and then Noah.
What I was going to say, in Israel, Hamas was elected in an election. They weren't take over. So also she said something about NATO. It's supposed to be a defense, but somehow they're out supposed to be looking for missions. NATO, if it's truly a defensive force, doesn't need to go out and look for missions. The missions will come to you. There's no need to be aggressive with a defensive alliance. And then on to the issue of where she started trying to dancing around whether or not she supports this or that, and she wouldn't want to get pinned down on supporting lifting the cap on Social Security. She's being completely disingenuous with that. Like, she says she agrees with him on the big issue, and then she proposes policy that is 1/10 of the issue that she supposedly agrees with.
Yeah. What do you think, Noah?
I do think this last exchange was really good. I do think that, and of course they got it wrong when they referenced, the people who said he supported. I do like his response that he has in fact raised money for the Democratic Senate committee. As I pointed out previously, he has campaigned for several different people, particularly they're people of color that other people in Congress would not even bother to. I always get her name wrong. Gloria, I can't get her last name right, but she was in South Carolina and she was an elected official here in Georgia, and then she was running in South Carolina. Yeah. There's work that he's done out in California with local city council people. So I think that was good, that he did point out that I have done this. It's incorrect to say I haven't done anything.
Not to mention New Hampshire. New Hampshire.
Yeah, well, New Hampshire, that would have been something good too. I remember you raised that before. Do you want to just quickly
the Democratic Party is really, it was on the brink of collapse in New Hampshire. Remember, that used to be a red state for the most part, and Bernie Sanders single-handedly turned that around. So this idea that he hasn't campaigned or done anything for Democrats, that's just misinformation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put it
and
out
as
there.
we saw yesterday, you know, he is supporting three, not just three Democrats who are running for office, but three women, two of color, you know, in particular, who we've been calling Bernie-crats, Sanders Democrats, and I just thought that that was a really strong point. And then, but I also thought for him to point out the reason why she raises the money the way she does, and I'm not raising money like she does, is because I don't believe in this means of fundraising. You know, I support campaign finance reform. This is what I stand, because that's what they always say, right? Well, you know, she raises money, and I mean, there's articles that talk about how she and her PACs exploit, and now we've seen the stuff with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC, you know, basically rescinding policy that President Obama put in place in terms of funding and dealing with lobbyists and stuff.
Let me jump in there before the time comes back.
Go ahead.
I know they're coming. He killed in this last section, so I don't know when the next debate's going to be, because it's all sporadic at this point.
Next month.
Do you have to fix before the next debate?
He needs a better gun. Because we've all, like, you guys probably don't know this, but we've all been going back and forth internally about the gun issue, about the manufacturer liability, about the Sandy Hook. He needs to have a crisper, cleaner, better answer. Like, Sandy Hook, oh my God. But, you know, I voted against the assault weapons ban. Well, there's so much technically that's wrong, and like we all said, like I've said to you guys before, he can acknowledge that there's a right to sue, or he can acknowledge that they may have a valid lawsuit, because that's what the emotional part is, right? Like when they mention the principal's daughter, you know, they keep talking about how they're hurt because he thinks they shouldn't be able to sue. And there are so many different issues and stuff involved there.
Right. I hate to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
Back.
Welcome back to the CNN presidential debate. It's time for the candidates' closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes. Senator Sanders, you're first.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the son of an immigrant who came to this country from Poland at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket, never made a whole lot of money, but was a very proud American, because this country gave him and my mom the opportunity to send their kids to college. I believe that this country has enormous potential if we have the guts to take on the big money interests who dominate our economic and political life. And I disagree with Secretary Clinton in the belief that you can get money from Wall Street, that you can get money for a super PAC from powerful special interests, and then at the end of the day, do what has to be done for the working families of this country. I just don't accept that. What I believe is that this country, if we stand together and not let the Trumps of the world divide us up, can guarantee health care to all people as a right, can have paid family and medical leave, can make public colleges and universities tuition-free, can lead the world in transforming our energy system and combating climate change, can break up the large financial institutions, can demand that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. And we can do that when millions of people stand up, fight back, and create a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. That is what the political revolution is about. That is what this campaign is about. And with your help, we're going to win here in New York. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Clinton.
Wow. New York is lit.
Secretary Clinton.
Thank you. I am very grateful for the fact that the people of New York gave me the great honor of serving as your senator. You took a chance on me in 2000, and then you reelected me with one of the biggest margins we've had in our state in 2006. During those years, we worked closely together. I tried to have your back, and time again, you had mine. We took on the challenges of 9/11 together. We got the money to rebuild New York. We came to the aid of our brave first responders, construction workers, and others who endangered their own health by helping to save lives and search for survivors. We worked to create jobs despite the disastrous policies of George W. Bush across New York. And we stood up time and time again against all kinds of vested, powerful interests. I'm asking for your support again in the primary on Tuesday to continue that work together, to take what we did in New York and to take those New York values to the White House and put them to work on behalf of all of our people, to knock down the barriers that stand in the way. You know, of course we have economic barriers. I've been fighting against those, trying to even the odds most of my adult life. But we also have racial barriers, gender barriers.
I was just saying this is coming.
Homophobic barriers, disability barriers. We have a lot of barriers that stand in the way of people being treated as they should and having the chance to live up to their own God-given potential. So I am humbly asking for your support on Tuesday. I'll work my heart out for you again. And together, we won't just make promises we can't keep. We'll deliver results that will improve the lives of people in New York and America. That's what we'll do together. Thank you, New York.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you very much, Senator.
I
want to thank the candidates for a really terrific debate.
All right,
also
folks.
to Dana Bash and Errol Lewis.
All right, shout out to the moderators. I do have to give the moderators a shout out. This, I think, besides the which one was that? The Telemundo? It wasn't Telemundo. Univision. Good Lord, I just called. Man, that was probably a microaggression. I apologize, people. But the Univision in Miami. Besides that debate, I think that debate was the best one. Still, this one was a close second because the moderators actually did some serious question asking and follow up and did not let anybody off the hook. All right, so let's get you guys' opinion. What do you think? How do you score this? What are the takeaways? Let's go with Noah.
I love Bernie. I do. But they fell down on the team. Bernie fell down on the job. After demanding, pushing to have this debate, he should have been coming out the door guns blazing.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said it in the chat, but somebody said, you know, he probably was having too many rallies, not enough time for debate prep. I don't know what the answer was. You know, he did better in the second half, but he stumbled and fumbled. I mean, she doesn't have to do well. She just has to she doesn't have to do well. All she has to do is maintain.
Right.
And he didn't do enough. There are so many things that we've all mentioned that should have came up, stronger answers. I don't understand at this late stage in the game why the team does not have this stuff like together. You should be able to pull this like instantaneously. Maybe they need to come holler at you about the break prep next time. Like, I really don't know, but I don't think it hurt him. But he needed this. He needed this. And
yeah, we were saying this last night. I think last night someone was asking how does he win, and he needed to absolutely crush her. There's so many questions lingering in the minds of everyone who watched, especially if they watched the entire thing. I think if they picked up just the second half, that they would be like, okay, Bernie came with it. But the first half, I mean, two things, like you're crowning issue, you not only have to be able to answer it, but you also have to be able to answer why your opponent can't touch you on it. And he didn't even point out some of the more obvious things on breaking up the banks, on what money has influenced Hillary Clinton on. He just missed a lot in that first half. If he had not made up for it in the second half, this probably would have been one of the last times we see Bernie Sanders in this presidential election, because it was so, to me, it was really weak at the beginning, and then and he made up a lot at the end. I think he came out with haymaker after haymaker after that break. What do you think, Nick?
I think he did very, very, very well at the end. But like you said, when she asked for an example, and he couldn't provide one, that was really devastating. You need to have an example right on the bat, and the example is right there. This is the example. I'm arguing to break up the banks before they wreck our economy again, and you're saying, no, we don't need to break them up.
Yeah. I hate to cut you off, Nick, but you have another bad connection, and I don't know. Maybe we've just been burning up too many Google hours here, and we're still getting a bad signal from you. I think we heard most of it. I want to. I don't know. Let's open up the lines, right? 857-600-0518. Let's see what other people thought. Let me fire up that computer. I was being lazy. I didn't want to fire up the computer, but just like with the gun thing too, like that was. Because it has been such a huge issue. Like, we all knew that was coming. There's no way they didn't know, well, your answer is good enough. Well, technically, yes, we may all agree that technically he's correct, blah, blah, blah. But that's not a technically correct issue. That is a very emotional issue. That issue has been used to give an emotional response. I am glad that he did kind of push back when she tried to say, well, I was just saying that guns come from other states. No, you weren't. You went out, her and her team went out of her way to make it seem like Vermont somehow was this great provider of guns to New York State. Right. When more guns come from within the state itself. I think one of the biggest things that we saw tonight, I think it became so much more transparent how disingenuous Hillary Clinton is on some of her answers. I'm trying to think of one string of results of answers that felt sincere coming from her. But they asked questions that she had to intentionally ignore or intentionally deflect from and intentionally pivot. And the audience in New York was not having it. I mean, and to be fair, they booed Hillary, they booed Bernie, they cheered for Hillary, they cheered for Bernie, they laughed at Hillary. I mean, but I think that they got at Hillary a lot more because of how much she blatantly and patently just pivoted from every question, refused to answer. What do you think, Nick? Let's check your mic out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's a little distorted, but let's go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think it may be my connection, not necessarily my. I'm using different mic, and it seems like it might be distorted. What I want to say is, I think what's super important is they didn't really stay much on the economic issues because she's really weak there. They moved from the topics where she was weakest, and they kind of lingered on topics where Bernie was weaker. They lingered on the gun thing for 30 minutes. It was like 20. It was about almost 20 minutes.
Wow.
They lingered on it for a while. They lingered and lingered. They asked like 3-4 questions and like four rebuttals or so. I was like, man, they are really sitting on this question a lot. And you're right.
I think because they smelled blood in the water, right? It's like, I think they would have done a disservice to themselves as moderators not to seize on that question because Bernie Sanders left himself wide open. I think if Bernie had come succinctly on that issue and boldly on that issue as well as sympathetic on that issue, boom, they would have had to move on. But I didn't realize it was that long, 20, 30 minutes.
It was like 20 minutes. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was a lot longer than the economics portion where Hillary is weak. They moved on from those questions very, very quickly. And what I think he should have done here is, number one, he needs to make his responses quicker because he runs out of time every answer.
Every time.
And it makes no sense. He does not have to take as long as he does to get his point across because sometimes less is better. And he needs to start working with that because it's a lot easier, to get your message out, especially if it's a simple message. Just give a simple answer. He's done it several times. He needs to, make better use of that. Yeah. And then on top of that, he also needs to make sure that he's not kind of rambling or walking into stuff that he doesn't have to. Like I mentioned it before.
Yeah.
If she was out there alone and taking damage for that crime bill, you don't have to mention that you also voted for it. You can let them bring that back, and then you can address it at that time. But when she's already taking hits, you don't have to go out there and hold hands with her and take it together. You can hit her first, and then you can hold hands. Y'all can take the remainder together, but you add your hit in first.
Yeah.
I don't think owning his vote. I don't think owning his vote on the crime bill necessarily is a hit or hurts him. He needs to do it. I mean, that's one of the biggest complaints, that everyone is dogging Bill, but Bernie voted for it too. And I think it's better for him to get out in front of it versus them hitting him possibly with a question in that respect. But I do agree with you that he doesn't necessarily have to volunteer information. In that respect, I think saying, yes, she's right, I voted for it, and then going on, but he needs to have a stronger point, because the issue isn't that, Bill passed it, because she doesn't let up on him. The issue isn't just that, he voted for it. She likes to tout the good things. Bill likes to tout the good things. He missed two things with that whole exchange. One, in the 90s, they lured them into voting for that bill with the vol provision, with certain things, right? He wasn't the one that was advocating, because this is the thing with the Clintons, right? They were advocating the worst parts of the bill. That was what the selling point is. In 94, when she's, giving interviews about the crime bill and hoping that it would pass, she's touting, the increased funding for building more prisons. She's touting the stiffer penalties and stuff. That's what she's talking about. When we get to 96 and everybody's like, oh, well, Super Predator had nothing to do with the bill, da-da-da-da. It did, because Clinton was up for re-election in 1996. So when she's out there talking about, Super Predator and the crime bill, using by then statistics that were already disputed and debunked, she's trying to help her husband get elected as one of his surrogates. She's just like we're holding the Bernie surrogates, responsible today. As a surrogate of the Clinton campaign, Hillary Clinton needs to be held responsible for what she said, what she portrayed, and what she put out there to the American people. And that's how you really, get in front of it. And then with the Bill Clinton thing, go ahead, Ben.
He had that opening, right? He
had
that opening to nail her on that piece of legislation, and then he did exactly what Nick said. He held her by the hand and said, yes, we were in this together. But no, you really weren't, Bernie, because there is a difference. Michelle Alexander points this out. Everybody's trying to point this out, and it seems like none of the national surrogates or Bernie have been willing to point this out, that there's a difference between him supporting this piece of legislation as a result of the Violence Against Women Act as one of the main components as why he supported it, but then more importantly than that, the fact that he came out so vocally against the negative things in it, and he made a vote that he, depending on where you stand, he should not have made that vote. At this point, I think we all agree that 94 crime bill is baggage for everyone. However, if you look at exactly what you said, Anoa, Hillary Clinton advocated the very things that screwed the black community the most.
And remember, I brought it up already.
Go ahead.
I brought it up already that, remember this.
You might as well cut your camera back on because your audio is just as bad.
Oh, man.
It's okay.
It's okay.
You're getting inaugurated. This is initiation for real.
I guess so. What I was gonna say is, shit, I forgot what I was gonna. Oh, here it is.
No problem. Okay, go for it. You found it.
I got it back. Remember, the crime bill didn't pass on the first time around.
Yes,
they had to add those things just to get the bill to be able to be passed, and it did not pass with a majority of Democratic votes. They passed it with a lot of Republican votes. A lot of Republicans signed on to that bill. It wasn't just Democrats.
Right. Yeah.
That is something. That's one of those things that I would say she likes to get things done. This is the piece of bad legislation that she was able to get bipartisan support to get done. I do not want to repeat those type of things moving forward.
Yeah.
And I'm going to move off of that just for a second. I'm going to bring up something. They keep bringing up is who is really a Democrat.
Right.
At this point, when you have somebody who's garnering 42% of the vote in the primary, I don't think the argument should be who is really a Democrat, because obviously 40 or so percent of the actual vote is going that way. So at this point, that's really moot.
But even better than that, it's like at this point, There's an article in Salon that said this is a difference. This election is really about the New Deal versus neoliberal, right? It's the fight for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. At this point, in this election in New York, this would have been the perfect place, and that was the perfect opportunity for Bernie Sanders to hammer the fact that he is more of a historical Democrat than Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton combined, because what they represent is absolutely, I don't want to say completely antithetical, but it's almost antithetical to what Democrats have historically been, particularly on economic issues. Now, we don't want to talk about their race issues back in the New Deal era time, but in terms of economic issues, Hillary Clinton is a blue dog conservative Democrat. In terms of war, Hillary Clinton is a blue dog conservative. In terms of economics, she's blue dog conservative, fiscal conservative, neoliberal politician. And he is more Democratic historically than Hillary Clinton would ever be, but he didn't seize that opportunity. I don't know. Go ahead, Noah.
Well, I agree with that. And the other thing I was going to say before we start talking about who's a Democrat, but it goes back in, the same thing with the Bill Clinton conversation, right? Well, you said Bill Clinton needs to apologize, but he didn't go that next step to explaining, like, what's the big deal? Why does Bill Clinton need to apologize? Because, like you're saying, Bernie Sanders is historically more of a Democrat than either one of them. When you look at the rise of the Clinton, dynasty, basically, so to speak, it has been, following off of what Nick was saying, getting things done by out-Republicaning the Republicans before the Republicans can do something, supposedly trying to save us, under the guise of, well, we had to do this because the Republicans were going to do something worse, when that's not true. Bill Clinton rode his white horse in on this whole, I'm tough on crime. I mean, Bill Clinton, infamously flew back to Arkansas when he was running for president from the campaign trail to oversee the execution of a mentally incapacitated black man, right? To prove how much he was so tough on crime, while he's in the midst of an election cycle. And what was interesting when I was going back and reading accounts that describe, this whole incident, Rahm Emanuel, Clinton friend, because what people don't really realize is how far back Rahm and the Clintons really go. I mean, they go all the way back to 92 running for president, right? I mean, they've been in cahoots for a very long time. Rahm had a hand in that. As a strategist, as a member on the campaign team, he had a hand in that. And so we have these new Democrats, right? We have these neoliberals who are not beholden to the values of an FDR or a Johnson, so to speak, right? Like they have this whole new way of doing things. We have the creation of the DLC, right? Like that picture and that really great article that Michelle Alexander shared around, where you had the picture of Bill Clinton at Stone Mountain, right after while Reagan's president. You have Bill Clinton in Stone Mountain. You have black prisoners standing behind him. Like, if anyone wasn't clear of what was going on in that was a work camp that he was taking a picture at, and those were black prisoners. I mean, they have built their career on, objectifying people of color for their own personal gain and opportunity. And somehow now we have Hillary and to some extent Bill using the language, as you've said before, Ben, of intersectionality to kind of let us know that they've learned their lesson and we can trust them to be the standard bearer of this new wave going forward of destroying institutional racism. And it's crap.
And that's the part that frustrates the hell out of me, right? So if anybody has been, let's just do an arbitrary anecdotal scale of intersectionality in terms of Hillary and Bernie Sanders. If anybody gets even a B- on intersectionality throughout their whole career, I'd say Bernie Sanders probably gets a B or a B-. He's definitely not flawless in race issues, but Hillary Clinton, based on her entire career up until this election, was probably a D-, damn near an F, in terms of their positions and their look, the way they perceived African Americans, minorities across the board, the language that they use, the offensive language that they use, and even some of the offensive language that they use now. Hillary Clinton is failing on his on intersectionality, but all of a sudden, who was I talking to? I know it was Rania last night. All of a sudden, she has this perfect score on the language of intersectionality, and that's only because there's a team of black women on her staff who are writing some brilliant pieces and brilliant tweets that are perfectly phrased intersectional phrases, yet time and time and again, when you catch her off script, she fails all over again. And that is the biggest example of bamboozling that I've seen in a long time. Somebody who has the worst history on race in a campaign being championed as the race hero, and the person with the better record, not the best record, but clearly a better record than Hillary Clinton, is disdained as some type of miscreant on race issues. Let's take this caller real quick. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, what's going on, man? It's JP, man.
JP, how's it going, man?
A couple quick things, man. Again, I think Bernie missed a golden opportunity to have two halves of a great game. He had a good second half. First half could have been better.
Yep.
I think that he literally just missed.
Yeah.
I don't think he was prepared. I think that some of the policy statements he just missed.
Yep.
He just simply missed. I put in the chat that afterwards that he ended up saying that he could have used the Elizabeth Warren point. But again, now half the people have left the room when you bring it up.
Yep.
So again, I think that he may need to cut back on one less rally and have more debate prep so that he can finish this thing. You know, I'm reminded of Mortal Kombat. And at the end of Mortal Kombat, when a person about to die, finish him. And Bernie yet does not know how to finish her when he has her against the rope. She was totally horrible today, and you know she was because they gave him a tie. Mainstream media don't give him that kind of grade. So I just want to let y'all know it was a great show. I love the wisdom that's in the room. Noah, I love the wisdom that you bring. Man, my man Nick, I love the wisdom you bring. Ben, you know you're the fearless leader. Love you both, man. Y'all going to keep doing what y'all do, man.
Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate the call. The lines are open, 857-600-0518. I have to agree, it was he missed so many opportunities, man.
Yeah, if they're calling it a tie, then I mean, she did not. I agree with JP, but also like, since, you know, she's like, you know, she struggled. She struggled too. And so it's not that like she's getting a pass or anything, but Bernie really, we needed another Miami debate. That's what we needed. And was there no immigration tonight?
No, I don't think there was a single question on immigration.
So that was problematic too, because he's phenomenally better than her, despite what they try to say about the 2007, you know, vote. Like he's exponentially better than her on immigration, and he should have tied that whole thing about judgment and foreign policy, while immigration is not necessarily Italian policy. You know, they have to train him, and I've said this before. They need to get him some law school, some second, third year moot court students to help train him on how to weave his points in a little bit better, the way she does. Somebody was saying she gets nervous when she starts scribbling. Nah, that's that legal training at work. She's raising up points, whether they're relevant or not. She's raising up points to make sure she can get her digs in at her opponent. This is April now at this point, right? We made excuses in October and December, whenever else, but at this point, there's no reason for it. He needs to be better prepared.
Listen, Bernie Sanders needs, I would say he needs about 10% more attorney in him, and 15% more technocrat in him, so that he can actually shut everybody the hell up. Because the truth of the matter is, here's a secret about a lot of technocrats who are politicians. They're not really technocrats. They have just enough knowledge and enough information to make everyone in the audience be like, oh, maybe we don't know as much as we think we know. And I saw Bill Clinton do this all the time. He would just spout off a lot of things. Some of it made sense, some of it didn't. But it stopped the moderators, it stopped the people in the audience, and it made them seem like they were superior. Bernie Sanders needs to have just that much technocrat in him so that he can address issues quickly, succinctly, and effectively, and he's just not doing that. And then I agree with you, Noah, 100% on him taking notes, using that tactic, because she's up there writing how she's going to pivot. I guarantee you, she hears a pivot and she writes it out and she nails and she delivers. I have to give her that in that regard. I think she's
I can ding Hillary Clinton for a lot of things, but she's strategic, right? And she's the type of person, if you're going to let them do something, they're going to keep doing it. Absolutely. If he doesn't stop her or shut her down, she's going to keep doing it.
I think he does a good job. I just feel like he needs to do it faster. And
wait a minute. His microphone is fixed. I don't know what you did, but your microphone sounds good to me. Go ahead, Nick. You got the floor.
Yeah, he just needs to do it faster. Like, he has a limited amount of time. He needs to make his point. He needs to either front load it or put half of it in the front and half of it in the back, because people aren't going to remember what you say in the middle. They're going to remember the first thing you said, the last thing you said. He needs to make sure he capitalizes. So each one of those points, somewhere in there, there needs to be an attack on Clinton and a double down on your point.
Yep, and last but not least, we're going to take this call. He needs to bring the Brooklyn out of him and a little less Vermont, right? He doesn't go for the blow, like he doesn't go for blood. And if he hasn't noticed, Hillary Clinton and her minions are coming for blood. They are trying to eviscerate him and leave his bowels laying on the floor in front of him, politically speaking. And he's being still kind of gentle, and the only things that he's being tough on are almost things that he's being forced into because of his surrogates, in my opinion. He's not come out and really hit her across the head, because how many things did he not mention tonight that he could have? Honduras.
And that was in the news this week. That was huge. In the way she doubled down, it was in her. I was expecting him I was expecting him with the New York Times, when she went into the New York Times interview, you said this, I was expecting him to come back at her, because if y'all both had the same sit down, right, that's fair game. That's, even though that's not what the topic is, that's what you need to go to, because it gets raised. Sorry for the legal analogies, but it's a character thing, right? Like, he's still reluctant to go after her, but when she opens the door,
my God,
absolutely fair game.
Yes, she set herself up for at least 3 knockdowns, and he didn't take it. Nick, what were you about to say?
You know what's so funny about this whole debate? It seemed like there was not a lot of important issues actually brought up. I don't know if you guys noticed. This whole debate seemed more like a tit for tat, or you said this or you said that. It really wasn't so much as an issue or a policy debate. It was more like a media frenzy debate, and that's why it really wasn't conducive to him as normally it would be, because there weren't a lot of avenues for him to open up and really hit her on that corporate welfare. There weren't a lot of avenues for him to hit her on deregulation. There just wasn't enough avenues for him to attack her corporatism. It seemed like that was pushed back to the side.
But you said this last week, Nick. I'm pretty sure this was you. Like, you don't ever argue the frame someone gives you. You don't let them limit you to that frame.
And he did some of that. He did pivot to his talking points in certain questions. He brought up health care and he brought up Social Security. He tried to extract a pledge from her, and she kind of tried to dance around it, and he cornered her.
That on Social Security, right? It was 2 different ones. It was Social Security, and he cornered her in a position, and he exposed. Now, I'll give him this. He exposed the fact that Hillary Clinton will say anything in the moment to survive the moment, and he closed the deal on her on that.
On climate change as well.
Climate change.
In Fight for 15, he kind of came back at her too.
He nailed her on those 3 things, and you have to ask the question, like, do her followers we can see that Bernie Sanders was not on his A game. We can see that Bernie Sanders needs to fill in the gap with some details, right? There's some details that he should just know and be able to hit. We see that Bernie Sanders needs to improve on his delivery, particularly with the gun question, right? But can her supporters not see that Bernie Sanders exposed the reality that she would say anything in the heat of the moment and then try to gyrate her way, I don't know why I said gyrate, but gyrate her way right out of it.
Because I was saying dance.
Dance, yeah, shucking and jiving for real though. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and our question? Oh, my baby's crying. Go ahead.
Hey, man, it's Bryce.
Bryce, what's happening, dude?
Well, I think that he definitely did have a strong second half in the closing. Like the first half, it was kind of like up and down. I definitely do believe he needs just some debate training. I mean, he's kind of getting a little better, but not as sharp enough, especially the way things are. I like the answer he gave about Israel Palestine. That was a very good answer. There's some things he has to work on. In terms of the issues, it wasn't really a lot brought up. It was kind of like back and forth. And, I mean, they talked about some things, but it didn't really, I don't know, it felt kind of off somewhat. But I think that he did a decent job, but he obviously could have done better. I watch what happens in New York, though, and what you guys think?
Yeah, no, I really the Palestine, right, on Palestine, that's going to stand out to me as one of the shining realities of this election. That the Jewish the son of a Jewish immigrant, the Jewish son, Bernie Sanders, it has the most reasonable and nuanced and the most sensitive to the human rights violations of that's been perpetrated on Palestine. It's just amazing to me that he would be the one that has this position, because you would think that a person of Jewish descent, a Jewish American, would absolutely be 100% pro-Israel. And he's saying, yes, I'm 100% pro-Israel, but I'm also not blind to the realities of Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not always right, and you wouldn't believe that this would be coming from Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton is the AIPAC far-right Netanyahu supporter. Go ahead.
Believe it or not, what I think he should have done is, by being pro-Israel, you're not going to gain anything, but there's a lot that you can gain by just going ahead and going against the grain all the way. Like, it's not really going to hurt you that bad. The Israel lobby doesn't mean anything because you don't take their money, right? They're already going to be either for a Republican or a neoliberal in general. So this might have been a time to just, discuss the elephant in the room, that what we have is an illegal occupation that is going on, and that is the root cause for all of this conflict. And so unless we address that, the violence and, the bombs and all this, none of that stuff will be happening.
You do realize what you just said is so controversial in American politics that you can be and you're not worried about being blackballed, but that one sentence, even though it's a objective reality, right? That one sentence is so damning in American politics, and that's why I think it stands out so much more than that Bernie Sanders is the one to address this issue. And I guess that makes sense, right? If you think about it, who better to address this issue about the hypocrisy of American politics as it pertains to Israel than a Jewish American, than Bernie Sanders? What do you think, Anoa? And then we're going to grab this call.
I think that I think that he potentially can be a bridge on this issue. I think this is one of several issues. I think that he's a good bridge between, different viewpoints because of his unique position. There are quite a few, actually, Jewish Americans, people who are rabbis, other members of the faith, who do hold similar beliefs in terms of the Israeli occupation and how Palestinians are treated, right? I do feel though that it's more so that he has this humanist grounding in philosophy that is an undercurrent for everything that he talks about. Like, everyone's like, oh, well, he's white, or he doesn't really have black people on his staff, so how could he actually talk about these things? He has this just basic humanist philosophy that he believes in, people's right to live and be happy, right? That's oversimplified, but that's what the basic gist of it is. So I think that helps him translate and step back and see that yes, how can you look at what happens? How can you look at what's happening in Gaza? How can you look at what's happening? How can you look at that and look at the history too and not, feel something for people? There are still, I remember writing a paper in college, there were old women when the houses were bulldozed, when they started doing the settlements, the illegal settlements, right? When there are old women who still had the keys to the house that no longer exists. Like, how can you think that this is okay when people are having everything taken from them? Because we live in a society we live in a society that's based on politicians, political leaders, making their opponents less than human. And
It's demagoguery. It's old as time, and it has never gone anywhere. And you see this, you know, you have a lot of people who don't view, and it goes both ways, right? You do have those on the opposite side who view Israel as dogs and people who don't have a right to exist, and then you have Israelis who look at Palestinians as dogs, as people who don't have any right to exist. And it's a classic case of demagoguery for political power and to maintain their status quo. And that's how you look at people who are in great despair and have absolutely no regard for it. But as it pertains to our American political system, it's like we allow this, and we haven't. I mean, let's name a politician who has come with this type of position, just bold. I mean, you said it. He's a bridge, and I don't think anybody else could do it except for someone of Jewish descent, right? I don't think anyone else could get away with it, because everyone else would be called anti-Semitic, and even Bernie Sanders has been called anti-Semitic.
It's called this week alone, right? We just saw today that, you know, they just announced that they hired a new Jewish outreach director, and just today she's suspended. You know, after 2 days, she's suspended because of first there were accusations that she was part of the boycott, divestment, you know, movement, and now it was a post. Basically, she wrote a Facebook post supposedly about Netanyahu, and was very strongly worded. And so, I mean, but the thing is, I think we've talked about it, you know, that type of stuff, like getting caught up in that type of stuff, people policing his campaign from the outside. Yeah. These are people who are not going to support you at all. You know, like, you know, American, you know, Jewish lobbyists, whoever, they have no intention on supporting him, right? The fact that AIPAC, you know, responded the way he did by refusing his request to do the video of his speech, when they've allowed people like, you know, Romney to do it previously, right? Like, you allow someone like Donald Trump, who everyone is comparing to being a fascist these days, when Donald Trump is, you know, invited and engaged and respected in your midst. Like, there's just so much going on right here. So, like Nick was saying, you don't even need to compete for that vote over there, because you're not going to get it. Like, if you want to talk about like not competing for certain votes, that's a voting block you don't even compete for, because you're not going to get it. You know, moderate to, you know, see the situation, you know, who can acknowledge that, you know, a two-state solution is the way to go, who acknowledge that, you know, there is a human rights crisis happening right now. I mean, no other country, ally or not, is allowed to disregard the United Nations the way Israel does. That's just plain and simple.
I said there comes a point you have to actually support your people. Like, when you have somebody working for you and they're under attack, you don't need to throw them under the bus because they're under attack. The people that are attacking them, and by proxy you, they're not going to vote for you anyway. If they said something wrong, rephrase their statement, remake the point, put it out there again, and double down. You don't need to distance yourself from somebody just because
I lost you, Nick.
They're under.
The audio fell apart.
Yeah, but I think Nick's point, from a little bit I heard, that, you know, and I think JP might have made this mention earlier in our chat, that, you know, when you have someone who is on your team, right, you clearly hired them for a reason.
Yeah.
You don't just, you know, toss them out because somebody said, oh, I don't like what that person said. Like, that's the same thing with, you know, the comments that I'm not going to repeat from yesterday.
How it works. Oh God, yeah. Well, that one. Okay, we'll talk about that one another time. With regard to the person, his staffer that he threw under the bus, or whoever made the decision, I'm sure it probably ultimately came from him. Here's how it works, right? People who want to see you fail are the ones who are going to point out some feigned outrage. And that's what they did with this post. She called him an asshole some years ago, and now all of a sudden she has to, you know, be held accountable for it 5 years later or 2 years later, whatever the case may be, right? And so right. Yeah, right. So I mean, and then at what point can we not say that about elected officials, right? That, I mean,
and this is the same person that openly disrespected the president.
Exactly. But here's the play, right? And this is what I think I heard Nick saying too. Those people aren't going to support you. Those people are trying to destroy you. And as soon as he suspended that young lady, and I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, but as soon as he suspended her, articles went out saying that Bernie Sanders, if Bernie Sanders is really pro-Palestine, then he should not have fired or suspended his Israel outreach. And then this article has been spread in the Hillary Clinton supporter camp as proof that he's not as good as he said he is. So it's like you're feeding. This is something my dad always taught me. He was like, you can pacify an alligator all you want, you'll be the last one they eat. You can never give way to people who are doing things just to undermine your progress. Let's get this number from 404, and then we're going to get out of here. 404, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question? 404, this is you. You're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hello?
Yep.
Ben?
Yep.
Hi. Yeah, so actually I was just saying that Hillary has an advantage in African American community and Jewish community according to the polls. That's where she is focusing on, and that makes a very tough issue for Bernie to, I mean, because he's losing 2:1 in Jewish community as well, and that's 10% of the voters, and then 20% is African Americans, 20 to 25%. So that's like very difficult to make.
Overcome.
So I don't know like how his best moment in the debate today may not really help him in terms
in
of
that
the
community.
votes,
Yeah.
like Israel Palestine. And then the second thing you talked about was the Miami debate being the best debate, but I don't know whether we overinflate the value of the debate changing the minds of people, because he got trounced after the Miami debates in all the states, although it was the best debate. It really, I personally believe grassroots canvassing changes minds more than debates, because the viewership is pretty low. Even if you see today's viewership, it was 1/3 of the Republican debate viewership. So I'm very,
well,
that was just...
no, great question.
And the last point was that I don't know, I sometimes feel that Trump will be better on foreign policy than Clinton, but I don't know. But it's like, she seems to be saying the same thing about Syria and Libya even now. I mean, she really doesn't change anything. So I'm like between Hillary and Trump, like yesterday's show, you said, I really don't know how, I won't vote at all. I mean, I really don't know how to vote for Hillary. Like if you look at the international perspective, I don't even know. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, okay, no problem, man. So just a couple key corrections. I didn't say I didn't say anything about not being able to vote for Trump, or I don't know who said that, but that wasn't me. Just for clarification. And then another clarification, when we were talking about Miami, I'm expressly talking about the moderators and the presentation and the questions and the follow-up and just some good journalism, in my opinion. I agree with you 100% on the fact that the ratings are so low that these are not going to reach a big enough audience to change anybody's mind in a significant way. And the first point you made a lot of points, caller, but the first point I think was the most salient is the fact that considering his deficit in the Jewish vote in New York right now, that his shining moment on Palestine actually may not be the best thing for him in terms of New York. So what do you guys think about all that?
But it may be the best. It may work well with when we talk about the black left. Because there are a lot of people, well, not just the black left, there is a growing movement. There are people in the country who are you talk about New York is both someplace that can be a tad conservative, but also very liberal at the same time. And there are quite a few people, there's strong Muslim Arab American support for Bernie Sanders for a reason, and this is part of it.
Isn't that something? He's getting the support from Muslim communities, and not so much love from
you have leading activists, Muslim American, Arab American activists who are supporting and endorsing, Senator Sanders, Linda Sarsour, Palestinian American activist who's very critical on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And even though, he may not be going as far as many of them would like, he is going the farthest out of, American politicians.
And he's taking this crazy first step that everyone seems to be afraid of taking in America, which is to just recognize the humanity of Palestinians. And sometimes just recognizing that humanity has been considered anti-Semitic in American politics. So, you know, even though he does not go as far as a lot of people on the left want him to go, he absolutely is, to me, I think he's gone the furthest that I've seen in a significant way, and it's simply amazing that it's coming from someone who is
From a
Jewish.
mainstream politician, yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean presidential candidates.
I
Definitely.
want to make something clear, though. You notice that the left from these other ethnicity groups, you notice what they do? They endorse candidates. They get behind candidates, and they work for candidates. They don't, well, I don't endorse any political candidate. You know, he still has a long way to go, blah, 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 blah. Look here. There's something to be learned from this, because let's say he does win, there's something to be gained for, you know, just to the winners go the spoils, right? Yeah. And if you don't get out there and get some skin in the game, you're really not going to get much, because if you don't produce voting power, there's no reason for them to give you anything. You don't represent votes. You're not a threat to them because you're not turning out people to vote.
Yep.
Well, and if you just represent votes, but you're not leveraging that voting power for anything, right? Conversely, right? You have this overwhelming black support. Yeah. Like, so on the flip side of what you're saying, just to follow up. So if you're putting votes up, but you're not leveraging it for anything meaningful besides some staff positions.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great critique, though. We as a block, you know, the black voting block, to say we're not a monolith.
It's a block.
Yeah, we have to be more serious, or we can separate ourselves, right? The black left voting block, right? Okay. Like, you know, I'm just saying, like, we can splice it down a little further. But seriously, you know, that's a great point, Nick, because we're just like, well, he's not far enough. But that quote from Rosa Clemente that I saw the other day about leveraging, you know, electoral politics, you know, the further, you know, maybe, you know, Black Lives Matter activists, I use them as an example because they're the ones that are more famous for saying, you know, he's not far enough, we're not going to endorse, we're not going to get into this. But, like, you get involved in what's going on, because then you have the greatest ability to actually effectuate what's happening, the verbiage, the language, the conversation. Like, okay, yeah, we had, you know, some opposition early on, and it forced him to have to change his course correction. But I really think, and Ben, I owe you a piece. I did my gun piece for tonight, but I owe you a piece on this. But I really think that there is an overestimation on how much that second interruption in Seattle actually played in terms of policy and what Senator Sanders is already doing. I know from sitting on a conference call with staff, with people from Netroot who participate in Netroot's action, with other activists, you know, immigration, you know, people, there were Palestinian rights activists on the call. It was a people of color call that was had like a while before the Seattle thing, in between Netroot and Seattle. So when Seattle happens and it's all, well, he hasn't responded, he's not reaching out, he's not listening, that's simply not true. Maybe your particular faction was not talked to because you don't want to be a part of electoral politics, but there are several of us, you know, I was on a phone call with like 300 people who were actually engaged, you know, on these issues. And there was a meaningful opportunity at that point. That was when he was launching, you know, his Latino initiative, his African American initiative. You know, they're like, well, the next day he came out with his racial justice platform. You think he just did like a college student cramming and came up with that masterful piece of work overnight? Like, come on now, like let's just be realistic. And so I think you're absolutely right. We don't leverage. This is now the angst with Obama, right? Well, Obama's done something for everybody else, but not us. Everybody else had a set of clear issues on day one they wanted resolved. You know, the LGBT community, we want marriage equality. You know, Latinos, we want this. I mean, and he might not have necessarily.
On top of all that, let me ask, on top of all that, they actually gave an ultimatum. Remember, the LGBT community was willing to withhold giving money. They weren't going to hold any more fundraisers. They weren't going to keep writing the checks unless they got what they wanted. That's how power works. Frederick Douglass said it best. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. If you just keep voting for them no matter what they do, where is the demand? Who has the power in that relationship?
Right, and that's why when we're always stuck in this, but we got to vote for the Democrat.
Yep. Let's take this caller. While I tweet this out to Eric Bowler. You know, these motherfuckers get me. Oh, excuse me, my son is right over there. So Eric Bowlert, whatever his name is, this surrogate for Hillary Clinton, said, quote, subtweeted me and said, the fact that Clinton has overwhelming black support is driving Sanders fans bonkers. Completely erasing the fact that I'm black you fatuous prick, right? Change your glasses, look at your lens, and stop buying into this. Stop doubling down on this trope of everybody who supports Bernie Sanders is white. No. Anyway, I'm gonna
But
handle
that's
this.
something else he should have said today, right? Because she tried to say that, well, I have this diverse, I have this. Look,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are not voting and engaged in the process. We all know plenty of black folks who can't stand Hillary, but they are not interested in voting at all because they don't believe that the system is going to let Bernie win.
It goes back exactly to what you guys were saying, and I was doing this over here, but I heard everything you said. It's this group. It's half the voting. Let's break it up into thirds, right? You got a third of the black voting bloc who just gives their vote away to the Democratic Party and doesn't ask any concessions other than a couple of key jobs for their best and their brightest, right? Then you have a third of the black voting populace who are so radical and to the left that they just don't feel like anybody is ever good enough, anybody ever is going to do anything, so they just don't vote. And then you got those of us in the middle who like, all y'all niggas is, oh God, dog, all of y'all are crazy. Y'all need to be participating in, and get something for your vote, and you got to vote to get something for your vote. And it's like this vast sea of nothingness that is happening. And in the absence of that political power, there's so many opportunities that we miss that we could leverage. Bobby called in about a month ago, and he said there's nobody who can get elected unless they get the black vote in the Democratic Party. And that is the absolute truth. Now, with that kind of political power, you mean to tell me all you need Hillary Clinton to do is show up and say black girls rock, and you're just going to give it away? That is the most asinine, piss poor, backwards mentality that I ever seen in my life, my political.
Well, and it goes back to probably one of the first conversations you and I had about how Bernie Sanders has been forced to jump through all these hoops, right? Mm-hmm. These unimaginable hoops. I understand that there's issue. People take issue with the characterization that he allowed Black Lives Matter to speak. I mean, quite honestly, you can mince those words and stuff. We can take issue with Killer Mike and other people's framing of the situation from Seattle, but the fact of the matter is, you were not arrested. You were not put out. You were not removed from that event. You did get to speak. Now, whether you had to forcibly take the stage, I mean, that's kind of what happens when you interrupt people. You have to, force your way into something. But the fact that ultimately it was resolved with you getting the microphone, that is somebody conceding and allowing you to be there. Because he would have been well within his rights, or the organizer of the event would have been well within their rights to have them removed, or whether that's right or wrong. I'm not saying that would have been the right thing to do either. But this notion, he jumps through all these hoops unnecessarily, where Hillary Clinton has been dismissive. She has had people removed. She always has somebody else do her dirty work for her. I go back to, there was the one attempt, late summer, early fall, when the young people, because they weren't even allowed into her event at first, right? She agreed to meet with them afterwards, and that was excuse. Well, Bernie's the easier target because, because Secret Service and security, we can't get to Hillary, or since he's so far left, he's going to force her to move further on the issues, and that's ridiculous. They have not been treated equally at all, particularly when we've already watched Hillary Clinton run for president, and we've watched how racist her and Bill can be. So if anything, she should be held to a higher standard.
It has to be her opponent. It better be. If anybody had to jump through hoops, it should be Hillary. But you got to understand now, the establishment is a hell of a drug. I got to get that soundbite of Rick James. It's a hell of a drug, because these are the same people. Let me choose my words carefully. Go to sleep, Benjamin. These are the same people who supported Hillary Clinton above Barack Obama in 2008. Don't let all these people who are feigning all this love over Obama, they only loved Obama when he started winning. I loved Obama before he even ran for president, when he was a little junior senator with a podcast back in around 2004.
Max was Obama for Max. My son was Barack Obama for Halloween.
You know what I mean? So but their love for Obama, and I'm talking about the black Democratic establishment to be sure, their love for Obama did not manifest until he started winning. Then they started to support Obama. John Lewis did not come out for Obama at first. He came out for Hillary Clinton first. James Clyburn.
And stood by. And with John Lewis, love John Lewis, the man, the myth and the legend. The man is flawed like any other man, and he stood by with some of the most racist stuff that was happening, and he did not shift until she lost South Carolina.
Exactly.
That's when he shifted.
Speaking of South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, he did not come out one way or the other. Many of these people, if you look at their timelines back in 2008, such as it was, especially on Facebook, they were saying this guy needs to wait his turn. It's Hillary Clinton's turn. These are black Democratic establishment who just got on board with Obama back into. Matter of fact, if you look at the race this week, there was an article from The Nation that shows that Hillary Clinton was leading amongst African Americans this same week in 2008. So all of this excitement over the support for Hillary Clinton, you have to understand this is a black Democratic establishment thing. They have always been enamored with the Clintons. They have always been enamored with access to power, and they have always been there, even at the expense of the first black president. And so we should not be so surprised that Bernie Sanders isn't getting the African American vote. We just need to be cognizant of the fact that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton has had the black Democratic establishment wrapped around their fingers as long as they've had the reins in power. And it's because it is about access to power. They want this power. They want these positions, and so they placate. They what's the word I'm looking for? They pander, or they're beholden to the Clintons because the Clintons represent access to power for black people. And so, no, it is not such a huge statement to say that Hillary Clinton is winning the minority vote. Oh my God, Bernie Sanders has a minority problem. By that same exact logic, Barack Obama had a minority problem in 2008 because he was not winning the black vote at this point in 2008. Now, I got a caller who's been patient, and they've been so patient, I don't even have them on mute right now, and you don't even hear them. 826, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hey, Ben. I know, Nate. This is Patrick Blanc.
Patrick, my dude, what's going on, man?
Florida.
How's it going, dude?
Just a real quick point to make, and not to go back to what you were saying earlier, but I didn't see Bernie in this debate make the point about asking a question, what is she comparing what she's willing to invest in military exploits versus what she's willing to invest in our economy. When you talk about even the vote for the war in Iraq, or even go to more modern times about the no-fly zone in Syria, I'm still waiting for someone to ask her, how much would that cost? Because apparently, there's no end in sight for this Syrian conflict. Suppose it's a multi-year conflict. How long will it cost us to sustain a no-fly zone for 6 months, a year and a half? Her intervention in Libya.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Did you ever ask, did you or the president ever think, how much would it cost us? But yet they want Bernie to account for every last dime of every policy proposal. And I think there's a huge double standard. I don't think it's because it's Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
I just think our media in general accepts.
And I'm going to be honest with you, Patrick.
We can spend trillions, and that doesn't warrant a question but a person asking to get universal health care to account for every last dime. And I was hoping and waiting for him to bring that contract. It didn't happen. Now, listen to you off air, and thanks for taking my call.
Thanks so much for your patience, man. I'm going to be honest with you. The fact is, that's the type of pivoting, that's the type of positioning that you have to have going up against anybody in a debate. You have to be ready for these things, man. You got to be twice as good. Bernie Sanders, I'm sorry, you're going up against the most popular, and by popular I mean name recognition, politician running for office in definitely in our lifetime, probably in 2 lifetimes. Like, I don't know anyone who's coming into a race with this much name recognition. You have to be 3 times better than her. And what better way to shut up the conversation about how we're going to spend, how we're going to afford free college tuition or tuition-free college than by mentioning the fact that we always have money for all of our militaristic exploits. We always have money for wars off the books, that if we took a fraction of that, if we took a fraction of what we spent in Iraq, we could cover these costs. And Hillary Clinton, being the hawkish person on stage, she is clearly far more hawkish than Bernie Sanders. She is going to engage in some type of militaristic exploits. And did you guys notice that she's still standing by her decision that she believes we should have a no-fly zone in Syria? Did you guys notice that?
Well, it seemed like she was trying to throw Obama under the bus a little bit.
Yeah.
By saying, well, I suggested this. He didn't listen to me, and had we done this, this would have happened.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. That's exactly what she said. And she conveniently threw him under the bus real quick and sly on the side, but nobody, they don't notice that because, she's Barack Obama's homegirl. What'd you
I
see?
completely agree right there. What I was gonna say is what's really weird to me is that, boots on the ground, to have a no-fly zone, there has to be people on the ground, like manning all that equipment and, actually, manning the equipment that actually does that. And we've got her on record last November saying that she actually supported ground troops in Syria before it became untenable. So we already know that she's, highly invested in military intervention. That's not even for debate. But what I wanted to also talk about is back to the last issue we just said. I think all too often they get glamored by the Clintons, and they trade real policy that would advance because A, they don't necessarily want it, they don't believe we can get it, or because they've just been tricked by the black faces in high places and think that that's what politics is. And it goes back to what Yvette Carnell says. That's a childlike understanding that believe that just because somebody who looks like you is up there that they're necessarily doing stuff for you, and those two things are completely different.
Clarence Thomas is a clear example of that.
Yeah, and you know what? If you bring that up, people have something to say about it.
To be unnecessarily fair to them, I'm going to extend this olive branch to their situation, right? I think they are voting for their best economic interests. I think they are voting for what they believe to be best for the African American community from their perspective. From their perspective, they have a very respectability politics. They will never admit it because we're in a different age of politics right now, but they have a respectability politics view of African Americans as well, because you see some of these same people justifying the crime bill of '94 based on the fact that, our neighborhoods were so bad back then and black people were all in favor for this. That's its own.
That's just the media spin, though.
No. This is black leaders saying this foolishness. These are black faces.
Well, yeah, you got to shape the narrative, right? Like, you have to shape some sort of narrative that people will believe, and it comes down to them saying that our communities were under attack.
Here's a problem. They really believe this. And so for them, it's not about making more ways for people in poverty to move up to the middle class, because they don't feel like it's a structural problem. For them, they think it's a personal meritocratic problem. They haven't done what they needed to do to move out of poverty into the middle class. These are the same people who look down on people in the hood. They're worried about Bernie Sanders calling it the ghetto. You got some of these same people who will drive through the ghetto and lock their doors just like any white person in America. So all these black people, I'm saying a lot of them who support Hillary Clinton, they support her not just because of name recognition, not just because of access to power. They support her because they really buy into this neoliberal economics. They buy into the meritocracy game. They buy into this entire trope of all you got to do is go to college. If you just do good and go to college, everything's going to work out for you, not realizing that people born in poverty, that road just really don't work out too well for people who go home from school and don't have lights, don't have access to clean clothes. Anyway, before I even go down that road, but that's what I'm saying. So simply put, some of them really believe in what Hillary Clinton is saying, and to them, she is the best for them because they have bought into this neoliberal economic paradigm and this meritocratic pipe dream.
Hey, look, but this is what blows up that argument. They were all applauding Loretta Lynch and all that when she got in there, but do you know the second day she was in there, she was going around telling the police departments that they don't have to track their killings of African-American children, but they hold her up. So if they really did believe in that nonsense, that, that would just shatter it right there. But remember, an ideology does not have to be logical. I'm saying they believe in her based off of an ideology or the propaganda that's put out there that shapes their politics. It's not necessarily because they actually believe in something and they're sticking to it. It's really that they're just following the propaganda game. You don't know how many people I talk to every day will tell me that Hillary Clinton taking all those money from all those corporations and all those businesses, that's not going to affect her in any way, shape, or form. That Hillary Clinton's Clinton Foundation, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's just all a right-wing attack. That that's just all right-wing nonsense that I'm making up when I say there's a definitely clear conflict of interest in here with the foundation's actual operations, taking money and then getting favors from the State Department and things of that nature. And I let them know, I'm like, hey, this is a Democrat. They're smart. They're not going to have a briefcase of money being exchanged at Denny's or something like that where you can easily see it out in the open. These are very, very, very smart individuals. Some of the smartest people in our country. They're not going to do their corruption that way. It's not going to be explicit. It's going to be implicit.
Yep. That is the way the cookie crumbles, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody give your last words. Not your last words. Give your last closing statements, and let's get the heck out of here. It's late. Whoever wants to go first, you guys could drop.
Go ahead first.
Can I just say, there are, unless my chat is like delayed or whatever, I can't believe so many of you are still here hanging out with us tonight. So thank you. But yeah, like I just really think that if you are in New York and you have the time or energy to do so, even if you don't, make it. Round up some folks and go make it happen. Print out some flyers. Go canvas. We need to get out the vote. I think that one of the previous callers had a good point. Grassroots action is really what's making the difference. I mean, in terms of Florida and other states, quite honestly, they did not compete in Florida. They didn't compete anywhere in the South, really. So everybody else, if you can't canvas and stuff, phone bank. It's BerniePB.com or BernieSanders.com/phone bank. Get on the dialer. They need to make 2 million calls this weekend. It's real. It's crunch time. And making those calls, getting people out to vote, that's what's important. That's what's going to make all the difference as we're moving forward. I did see a poll that he's actually up a few points in upstate, New York, and he's down actually in the city. So, I mean, need to hit the pavement, talk to people. I mean, there are a lot of people who are actually registered to vote who don't vote because they don't see the point. Yep. Have a conversation. It makes the difference.
Makes the difference, Nick.
Okay, I think he did well on healthcare. He did well on climate change. He did well on Fight for 15. He did well on the military intervention. I think he made some interesting points tonight. He really does need to be tougher on her, and he needs to use. He made a reference to wealth transfer. He needs to make sure he makes those references more often. He needs to talk about corporate welfare more often. He needs to make sure that remains a part of the discourse. He tried to extract some campaign pledges from her. She would not get pinned down on anything, and she was awfully resistant. So he needs to make sure he makes sure to keep bringing that up. But other than that, I think he did okay. He just needs to be a little bit more clear, a little bit more concise, and just keep doing what he's doing.
All right. I agree with everything you guys said tonight. The most important thing out of everything else that has been said tonight, click the subscribe button. Come back to watch some more of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Folks, we really appreciate you. If you really like what we do, go over to patreon.com/the BPD Show and sign up to be a patron. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you guys on Monday, and on next Tuesday I will be hosting the David Pakman Show. So check his channel on Tuesday for all the videos. I'll be hanging out with Lewis and making some videos over there for the show. That's it. Check us all out on Twitter. The Progressive Army, progressivearmy.com. You know where to find us. We're out of here.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Crazy mother.
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Y'all not going to bed? Well, yeah, I figured y'all be gone by now. Don't y'all got to go to work in the morning?
I work from tomorrow.
Yeah, I do too. Nick?
I was going to say, I'm in Central Time, so I'm an hour behind you.
Oh, man, no wonder.
Not to mention, I don't go to work till like 9.
Oh, man, that's lovely. What kind of work you do, if you can share?
I'm a skate engineer for one of our power companies right here. We actually deregulated our grid, so there's a lot of trading and a lot of money to be made off of the grid, and I'm a part of one of those companies that comes in and skims off the top, acts as a middleman and skims off the top, adds no value to the electricity actually delivered. It's terrible. But with that being said, I still would vote to have it not be this way and just find another job somewhere else.
Interesting. But since it is that way, you might as well get paid, right?
That's right.
Folks, I would love to hang out with you, but I'm
Good
on.
night.
See you guys next time.
All right.